Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The night shift in Los Angeles had a particular weight to it that Declan Marrow had never quite been able to explain to anyone who hadn't worked it. It wasn't just the darkness, or the way the city's usual chaos shifted into something stranger after midnight. It was something deeper, something that settled into your bones during those long hours between sunset and dawn, when you realized that most of the city was asleep and you were one of the few people still watching over it. Declan had been working nights for the LAPD for almost 4 years now, and he'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of it. The way certain neighborhoods went quiet after 2 in the morning, how the radio chatter changed tone as the hours wore on, the particular kind of exhaustion that came from trying to stay alert when your body was convinced you should be unconscious. He'd learned to read the city in the dark, to sense when something was wrong before dispatch even called it in. His partner for the past 18 months had been Elliot Bracken, a younger officer who'd requested night shifts specifically because the pay differential helped cover his student loans. Elliot was good people, the kind of cop who still believed the job meant something, who hadn't yet developed the cynicism that seemed to eat away at everyone eventually. Declan appreciated that about him, even if it sometimes meant listening to idealistic speeches about community policing at 3 in the morning. They were cruising down Western Avenue when the call came through. Dispatch's voice crackled over the radio, with that particular tone that meant something wasn't quite routine. All units in the vicinity of Koreatown. We have a 911 call reporting a disturbance at 742 Normandy Avenue. Female caller states someone is trying to break into her residence. Possible 459 in progress. Declan reached for the radio before Elliot could respond. 7 Adam 19. We're 2 minutes out. En route. Elliot hit the lights but kept the siren off as they navigated through the sparse, late-night traffic. Breaking and entering calls were common enough, though the time of night made this one slightly more urgent. Most burglars preferred to work when people weren't home. Someone trying to force their way into an occupied residence at 1:30 in the morning was either desperate, high, or both. "You know that area?" Elliot asked as they turned onto Normandy. Declan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened storefronts and apartment buildings that lined the street. "Yeah? Mostly older buildings, a lot of long-term residents. Used to have a gang problem back in the 90s, but it's been pretty quiet the last few years." He paused, running through his mental map of the neighborhood. 742 should be coming up on the right, that big apartment complex with the green awning. But as they approached the address, something didn't sit right. The building that should have been 742 Normandy wasn't an apartment complex at all. It was a 3-story structure with boarded-up windows and a chain-link fence surrounding the property. Even in the dim glow of the streetlights, Declan could see the condemned, no trespassing signs posted on the fence. "That can't be right," Elliot said, slowing the patrol car to a stop across the street from the building. Declan grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, 7 Adam 19. We're at the location, but the building appears to be abandoned and condemned. Can you confirm the address?" There was a pause, longer than usual, before dispatch responded. 7 Adam 19. Address confirmed as 742 Normandy Avenue. Caller identified the location as her residence. "Copy that." Declan exchanged a glance with Elliot. "We're going to check it out." They got out of the car, and Declan immediately felt that particular kind of urban silence that comes with abandoned buildings. No air conditioning units humming, no distant television sounds, no signs of human habitation at all. Just the occasional whisper of wind through broken windows and the ambient noise of the city blocks away. The fence gate was secured with a rusty padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Declan pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam across the building's facade. The windows on the ground floor were covered with sheets of weathered plywood, many of them tagged with faded graffiti. The upper floors showed signs of fire damage, with black scorch marks climbing up the exterior walls like frozen flames. "Looks like it's been empty for a while," Elliot observed, his own flashlight joining Declan's in examining the structure. "Yeah." Declan moved along the fence line looking for any signs of recent entry. "But somebody called 911 from this address. Could be a homeless person squatting inside," Elliot suggested. "Maybe they broke in and someone else tried to follow them?" It was a reasonable explanation, but something about it didn't feel right to Declan. He'd responded to plenty of calls involving squatters in abandoned buildings, and they rarely called the police. The whole point of squatting was to avoid official attention. They found a section of fence where someone had cut through the chain link, creating an opening just wide enough to slip through. The edges of the cut metal looked old and oxidized, suggesting this entrance had been here for months, if not years. "Should we call for backup?" Elliot asked. Declan considered it. Standard procedure for entering an abandoned building would typically involve waiting for additional units, especially this late at night when things could go sideways quickly. But the 911 call had reported an active break-in, someone in immediate danger. If there was actually someone inside who needed help, waiting could cost them precious minutes. "Let's do a quick exterior check first," Declan decided. "If we see or hear anything that suggests someone's actually inside, then we call it in and wait for backup." They slipped through the gap in the fence and approached the building, their footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. Up close, the structure looked even more deteriorated. The front entrance was secured with a heavy chain and another padlock, this one looking slightly newer than the one on the fence. Declan was about to suggest they circle around to the back when his radio crackled to life again. "All units, we have another 911 call from 742 Normandy Avenue. Same female caller reporting that someone has entered her apartment. She states she's locked herself in the bathroom and can hear them moving through her residence." Declan felt a cold trickle of unease run down his spine. He stared at the obviously abandoned building in front of him, then pressed the transmit button on his radio. "Dispatch, this is 7 Adam 19. We are currently standing in front of 742 Normandy. The building is condemned and appears to have been vacant for an extended period. There is no way anyone is making calls from inside this structure." Another pause from dispatch, longer this time. When the response came, there was a note of confusion in the dispatcher's voice. 7 Adam 19. The call is definitely originating from that address. We're showing a landline registered to that location." "That's impossible," Elliot muttered, but Declan held up a hand for silence. "Dispatch, what's the caller's name?" One moment. A brief pause. Caller identified herself as Lena Fairchild. Declan pulled out his phone and did a quick search for the address. What came up made his stomach drop. The first result was a news article from 8 years ago. "Woman found dead in Normandy Avenue apartment. Police investigating as homicide." He clicked on the article and quickly scanned it. Lena Fairchild, 29, had been found dead in her apartment at 742 Normandy Avenue. The building had been the site of what the article called a tragic incident that resulted in not only her death, but a fire that had damaged the upper floors. The building had been condemned shortly after, with plans for demolition that had apparently never materialized. "Elliot," Declan said quietly, turning his phone screen toward his partner. "Look at this." Elliot read the article, his face going pale in the glow of the phone screen. That's not possible. Someone's messing with us, right? Maybe spoofing the number or something?" Before Declan could respond, his radio came alive again. This time, instead of the dispatcher's voice, he heard something that made every hair on his body stand up. It was a woman's voice, panicked and breathless, coming through the emergency frequency. "Please, he's inside. I can hear him at the bathroom door. Please, send someone. I'm at 742 Normandy Avenue, apartment 3B. Please, I don't know how much longer." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Declan and Elliot stood frozen, staring at each other in the darkness outside the condemned building. Then, from somewhere inside the structure, they heard it. A sound that shouldn't have been possible in an abandoned building that had stood empty for 8 years. A phone was ringing. Not a cell phone with its modern digital tones, but an old landline with that distinctive mechanical bell sound that had been largely extinct since the early 2000s. It rang once, twice, 3 times, the sound echoing through the empty building and out into the night air. Then it stopped, and in the silence that followed they heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across what sounded like the floor directly above them. "We need to call this in," Elliot whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. Declan nodded, but he couldn't take his eyes off the building. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was impossible, that there had to be a rational explanation. Buildings didn't maintain working phone lines 8 years after being condemned. Dead women didn't make 911 calls. And yet, here they were, standing outside a structure that by all rights should be completely silent and dead, listening to sounds that had no business existing. He was reaching for his radio to request backup when they heard the woman's voice again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from inside the building, thin and terrified and very, very real. "Help me. Please. He's breaking through the door." Declan made a decision that he would question for months afterward. "We're going in." "Declan, we should wait for... If there's someone inside who needs help, we don't have time to wait." He was already moving toward the back of the building, looking for an entry point. "You can stay here and call it in if you want, but I'm not going to stand here and listen to someone die while we follow procedure." Elliot hesitated for only a moment before following. "You're going to get us both killed one of these days, you know that?" "Probably," Declan admitted. They found a back door that had been pried open at some point in the past. The wood around the frame splintered and rotted. It swung inward with a groan that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the night. Declan clicked on his flashlight and stepped inside, Elliot close behind him. The interior of the building was exactly what you'd expect from a structure that had been abandoned for nearly a decade. The floor was covered in debris, broken glass, and what looked like the remnants of makeshift camps left by squatters who had long since moved on. Water damage had caused the ceiling to sag in places, and there was a pervasive smell of mold and decay that made Declan's nose wrinkle. Their flashlight beams swept across walls covered in graffiti and peeling paint, cutting through darkness so complete it felt almost solid. They were in what appeared to be a ground-floor hallway, with several doors leading off to what had probably been first-floor apartments. "LAPD!" Declan called out, his voice echoing through the empty building. "If anyone's in here, make yourself known." No response. Just the settling creaks of an old building and the sound of their own breathing. They moved forward carefully, checking each room as they passed. All of them were empty, stripped of anything valuable long ago, just hollow spaces filled with shadows and the detritus of urban decay. "Where are the stairs?" Elliot whispered. Declan pointed his flashlight toward the end of the hallway where a doorway stood open. Should be through there. As they approached the stairwell, Declan's radio crackled again. Dispatch's voice came through, but there was something off about it, a strange quality to the transmission that made it hard to understand. 7 Adam 19, status, 742 Normandy. The signal was breaking up, which shouldn't have been happening. They were inside a building, sure, but not in a basement or parking structure. There was no reason for the radio signal to be degrading like this. "Dispatch, this is 7 Adam 19, Declan said into his radio. "We are inside the structure investigating. Signal is poor, but The radio emitted a burst of static so loud and sudden that both officers flinched. When it cleared, they heard something that made Declan's blood run cold. It was the woman's voice again, Lena Fairchild's voice, but it was coming through his police radio now instead of from the emergency frequency. "Officer, are you there? I can hear you in the building. Please, you have to hurry. He's almost through the door. I don't know what he's going to do to me. Please." Declan stared at his radio as if it had turned into a snake in his hand. That wasn't how police radios worked. 911 calls went to dispatch, who then relayed information to units in the field. Callers couldn't just broadcast directly on police frequencies. "This is impossible," Elliot breathed. "I know," Declan said, but he was already moving toward the stairs, because impossible or not, that woman sounded terrified, and every instinct he had was telling him to find her and help her. The stairwell was a concrete shaft that climbed through the building's core, and their footsteps echoed eerily as they ascended. The second floor was much like the first. Empty apartments, broken windows, and signs of fire damage that grew more severe the higher they climbed. "Apartment 3B, Declan muttered, remembering the address from the 911 call. "Should be on the 3rd floor. They continued climbing, and with each step, the temperature seemed to drop. By the time they reached the 3rd floor landing, Declan could see his breath misting in the beam of his flashlight, which made no sense given that it was a warm September night in Los Angeles. The 3rd floor had taken the worst of the fire damage. The hallway ceiling was partially collapsed, and the smell of old smoke still clung to everything despite the years that had passed. Apartment doors hung open like broken teeth, their numbers barely visible through the soot and grime. Declan swept his flashlight down the hallway, looking for 3B. He found it halfway down on the left side, and what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Unlike every other door in the building, the door to apartment 3B was closed. And more than that, there was a faint line of light visible beneath it, a warm yellow glow that suggested lights were on inside. "You seeing this?" Elliot whispered. "Yeah." Declan's hand moved to his weapon, though he didn't draw it yet. "Stay alert." They approached the door slowly, and as they got closer, Declan could hear something from inside the apartment. It sounded like someone moving around, the creak of floorboards under weight. And was that water running? He knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps. "LAPD, we received a 911 call from this location." The sounds inside stopped immediately. For a long moment there was complete silence. Then a woman's voice, muffled by the door, called out, "Oh, thank God. Please, you have to help me. I'm in the bathroom and I can't get out. He broke the lock somehow, and I pushed a dresser against the door, but I don't know how long it will hold." Declan tried the doorknob. It was locked, and the mechanism felt solid despite the building's age. "Ma'am, I need you to tell me who he is. Is there someone else in the apartment with you?" "I don't know who he is." The voice was rising toward the panic. "I just woke up and heard someone in my apartment, and I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. Please, you have to get me out of here." Elliot had pulled out his own flashlight and was examining the door frame. "We can probably force it," he said quietly to Declan. Frame looks weakened by the fire damage. Declan nodded and raised his voice again. Ma'am, we're going to force the door open. I need you to stay in the bathroom and keep that dresser against the door. Understand? Okay, just please hurry. Declan and Elliot positioned themselves, and on the count of 3 they threw their weight against the door. The old wood splintered around the lock mechanism, and the door swung inward with a crash. They swept into the apartment with their weapons drawn and flashlights up, ready for anything. What they found was nothing. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, no signs of habitation at all. The walls were fire-damaged and water-stained. The ceiling partially collapsed in places. Windows were broken, and debris covered the floor. And there was no light. No warm yellow glow, no signs of electricity at all. Just darkness and ruin and the smell of old smoke. What the hell? Elliot breathed. Declan moved through the apartment quickly but carefully, checking each room. A small kitchen, empty. A living area, empty. A bedroom, empty. And finally, a bathroom. The bathroom door was closed, and for just a moment, Declan thought he could see that same strange light seeping out from underneath it. But when he blinked, it was gone, and there was only darkness. He reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in his hand. The door swung open to reveal a small bathroom in the same state of abandonment as the rest of the apartment. The toilet was cracked, the sink hanging at an angle from the wall. The mirror above it shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. There was no one there. No frightened woman, no barricaded door, no signs that anyone had been in this apartment for years. "Declan," Elliot called from behind him, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Declan turned to find his partner standing in the middle of the apartment's main room, his flashlight pointed at the floor. He walked over and looked down at what Elliot had found. There, in the dust and debris that covered the floor, were footprints. Fresh footprints, the kind you'd leave if you'd just walked across a dusty surface moments ago. They led from the front door to the bathroom and back again, over and over, as if someone had been pacing back and forth. But the footprints were small. The size and shape suggested a woman's feet, bare feet, based on the complete impression. And they glowed, very faintly, with a luminescence that reminded Declan of those glow-in-the-dark stars kids put on their bedroom ceilings. They traced a path through the apartment that was simultaneously there and not there, visible one moment and gone the next. "We need to get out of here," Elliot said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need to get out of here right now." Declan wanted to argue, wanted to find a rational explanation for what they were seeing, but his instincts were screaming the same thing as his partner. This was wrong, all of it was wrong, and they needed to leave. They backed out of the apartment, neither of them willing to turn away from the strange, glowing footprints until they were through the doorway. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Declan heard something that made him freeze. A phone was ringing again, that same old mechanical bell sound, but this time it was coming from inside apartment 3B, right from where they'd just been standing, in a room that they'd confirmed was empty, with no possible source for the sound. The ringing continued, insistent and wrong, and Declan found himself counting the rings. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 7th ring, it stopped, and in the silence that followed, they heard a woman's voice, clear as day, coming from the empty apartment behind them. "Thank you for calling. I've been trying to reach someone for so long." Declan and Elliot ran. They didn't speak about it, didn't plan it, just turned and ran for the stairs like their lives depended on it. They clattered down the stairwell, their flashlights bouncing wildly off the walls, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time. Behind them, above them, they could hear footsteps following. Light, quick footsteps, like someone running barefoot across old hardwood floors. And under that sound, almost too quiet to hear over their own panicked breathing, was a woman's voice calling out to them. "Don't leave. Please don't leave. I've been alone for so long, please." They burst out of the building's back door and didn't stop until they were through the gap in the fence and back at their patrol car. Declan leaned against the hood, gasping for breath, his hands shaking as adrenaline flooded his system. "What the hell was that?" Elliot demanded, his voice pitched higher than normal. "What the hell did we just see?" "I don't know," Declan managed, but that was a lie. He had an idea, one that was forming in the back of his mind even as he tried to push it away. Lena Fairchild had called 911 8 years ago. She'd been terrified, trapped in her bathroom while someone broke into her apartment. The police had responded, but by the time they got there, she was already dead. The official report had said it was a break-in gone wrong, that the perpetrator had started a fire to cover their tracks. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if something about that night, about her death, had left an impression on that place? What if she was still calling, still waiting for help that came too late? His radio crackled to life, making both officers jump. This time it was the dispatcher's normal voice, clear and professional. 7 Adam 19. What's your status? We lost your signal for several minutes. Declan grabbed his radio, trying to steady his voice. Dispatch, we've completed our check of 742 Normandy. Building is abandoned and empty, no sign of any occupants. Copy that, 7 Adam 19. We've received 2 more 911 calls from that location in the last 5 minutes. Same female caller, same report of a break-in in progress. Declan stared at the condemned building, at the dark windows that seemed to stare back like empty eye sockets. Dispatch, those calls are... There's no one in that building. It's been condemned for years. Understood. But the calls are still coming in. We need to... The radio dissolved into static again, and through the interference, Declan heard her voice one more time. "I'll keep calling, every night, until someone helps me, until someone stays." The static cleared, and dispatch was speaking again, asking for clarification on something, but Declan barely heard it. Because as he stared at the building, at the third-floor window that had to be apartment 3B, he saw something that made his blood freeze in his veins. There was a figure standing in the window, a woman's silhouette, backlit by that same impossible yellow glow they'd seen under the apartment door. She was just standing there, motionless, and even though Declan couldn't make out any details at this distance, he knew she was looking directly at him. "Elliot," he said quietly. "Do you see that?" But when Elliot looked up, the figure was gone, and the window was just another dark square in an abandoned building's facade. They drove away from Normandy Avenue in silence, neither of them willing to talk about what they'd experienced. Declan knew they'd have to file a report, knew they'd have to explain why they'd entered the building and what they'd found there. But how could he explain something he didn't understand himself? The rest of their shift passed in a blur. They responded to a noise complaint, broke up a fight outside a convenience store, issued a citation for a broken tail light. Normal police work, the kind of routine calls that made up 90% of the job. But Declan couldn't focus, couldn't stop thinking about that voice, those glowing footprints, that figure in the window. As dawn began to break over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Declan dropped Elliot off at the station and headed home. He was exhausted, running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and started digging into the history of 742 Normandy Avenue. What he found didn't make him feel any better. Lena Fairchild had been the last victim, but she wasn't the only one. Over the building's 70-year history, there had been 4 deaths in apartment 3B specifically. a murder-suicide in 1962, a suspected overdose in 1978, an unexplained death in 1989, and finally, Lena in 2015. And according to several forum posts from paranormal enthusiasts and urban explorers, 742 Normandy had a reputation. People reported hearing voices, seeing figures in windows, feeling watched. Several people claimed to have received phone calls from the building despite it having no working utilities. One post, from 3 years ago, caught Declan's attention. It was from someone who identified themselves as a former LAPD officer, now retired. I responded to a 911 call at 742 Normandy back in 2016, the post read. The building was already condemned, but dispatch kept getting calls from a woman claiming someone was breaking into her apartment. I went inside, same as the OP, and I heard her voice clear as day, calling for help, begging me not to leave. I searched that whole building and found nothing, but I still hear her sometimes when I close my eyes. Whatever's in that place, it's not right, it's not natural. My advice? If you get a call from that address, you let someone else take it. Some things aren't meant to be investigated. Declan closed his laptop and sat in the growing daylight, thinking about that advice. Let someone else take it. Walk away from the impossible and focus on things that made sense, things that could be explained and solved and filed away neatly. But he knew he wouldn't do that, couldn't do that. Because somewhere in that condemned building, a woman was still calling for help, still waiting for someone to save her. And whether she was a ghost, a recording, or something else entirely, Declan couldn't just ignore that. His phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "You awake? We need to talk about last night." Declan stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Yeah, we do. Because this wasn't over." Whatever they'd encountered at 742 Normandy Avenue, whatever connection had been made when they entered that apartment, Declan had a feeling it was just beginning. The calls would continue. Lena Fairchild would keep reaching out, keep asking for help, keep waiting for someone who could actually save her. And despite every logical part of his brain telling him to leave it alone, Declan knew he was going to try. Declan met Elliot at a diner 3 blocks from the station, the kind of place that served breakfast 24 hours a day and didn't ask questions when cops showed up looking like they'd seen a ghost. They slid into a corner booth away from the windows, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The waitress brought coffee without being asked, recognizing the particular brand of exhaustion that came with night shift. Declan wrapped his hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth even though the morning sun was already heating up the city outside. "I've been thinking," Elliot finally said, keeping his voice low. "Maybe we both just, I don't know. Maybe there was a carbon monoxide leak in that building or something. Maybe we were hallucinating." Declan wanted to agree with him, wanted to accept that easy explanation and move on. But he'd been a cop long enough to know when something didn't add up, and this didn't add up. We both heard the same things, saw the same things. Carbon monoxide doesn't work like that. Then what does work like that? Elliot's voice had an edge to it, frustration mixed with fear. "Because I've been trying to come up with a rational explanation for the last 4 hours, and I've got nothing. That building was empty, Declan, condemned and empty. So why did we hear a woman calling for help? Why did we see footprints that glowed in the dark? Why did my radio pick up a voice from someone who's been dead for 8 years?" "I don't know," Declan admitted. He pulled out his phone and showed Elliot the research he'd done. "But look at this. 4 deaths in that same apartment over 70 years, and people have been reporting weird experiences there for decades." Elliot scrolled through the information, his face growing paler with each paragraph. "This is insane. You're talking about this like it's a haunting or something. I'm talking about this like it's a pattern we need to investigate. Declan kept his tone steady, professional. Whatever happened in that building last night, it's been happening to other people. Other cops even. We need to figure out what's going on. No, Elliot said firmly, pushing the phone back across the table. What we need to do is file our report, say we checked the building and found nothing, and never go back there again. That's what we need to do. Declan started to argue, but his phone buzzed before he could speak. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Officer Marrow, this is Sergeant Rita Campos from Central Division. We need to talk about 742 Normandy. Can you meet me at the station this afternoon? He showed the message to Elliot, who groaned and dropped his head into his hands. Great. Now we're getting called in on our day off. Might be good, Declan said, already typing a response. Maybe she knows something about what's going on. 3 hours later, after a failed attempt at sleep that left him staring at his ceiling and replaying the events of the night over and over, Declan walked into the Central Division station. Sergeant Rita Campos was waiting for him in a small conference room, a thick file folder on the table in front of her. She was in her late 40s with the kind of weathered competence that came from decades on the job. When Declan entered, she gestured for him to close the door and take a seat. Officer Marrow, she said by way of greeting. I read your preliminary report from last night, the one about the 911 calls from the condemned building on Normandy. Yes, ma'am. Declan waited, unsure where this was going. Your report was very careful, Campos said, opening the file. You described responding to the location, entering the building to investigate, finding it empty, and clearing the scene. All very procedural and professional. That's what happened, Declan said, though they both knew he was leaving out the important parts. Campos smiled without humor. Officer Marrow, I've been with the LAPD for 23 years. I know what a carefully worded report looks like when someone's trying not to sound crazy. She pulled a stack of papers from the file and spread them across the table. These are all reports from the last 8 years, all involving 742 Normandy Avenue. Want to guess how many of them describe exactly what happened, and how many are written like yours? Declan looked at the reports, recognizing the same careful language he'd used. Officers responding to 911 calls, investigating the building, finding nothing concrete but clearly experiencing something they couldn't or wouldn't put in an official document. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Because dispatch received 4 more calls from that address this morning, Campos said. Same voice, same story. Woman trapped in apartment 3B, someone trying to break in, terrified and begging for help. And I need to know if I should keep sending officers to respond, or if I should mark it as some kind of system glitch. Declan met her eyes. It's not a glitch. No, Campos agreed. I didn't think it was. So tell me what really happened last night, off the record. So Declan told her, all of it. The voice on the radio, the light under the door, the glowing footprints, the phone ringing in an empty room. Campos listened without interrupting, her expression never changing until he finished. Lena Fairchild, she said quietly. I was one of the responding officers when we found her body. Declan felt something cold settle in his stomach. You were there? 8 years ago, yeah, it was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. It was bad. The kind of scene that stays with you. She'd called 911 reporting a break-in, said someone was trying to get into her bathroom where she'd locked herself. We got there maybe 15 minutes after the first call. Place was already on fire by then. What happened? We found her in the bathroom, just like she said. Door was broken down, and whoever had been in there with her had already left. Medical examiner said she'd been dead for at least an hour before we arrived, which didn't make sense because we'd been getting 911 calls from her the whole time we were en route. Declan leaned forward. What do you mean? She was calling while she was already dead. That's what it looked like, though obviously that's impossible. The official explanation was that she made multiple calls before the perpetrator got to her and dispatch just had them queued up. But I was listening to those calls, Marrow. She was describing what was happening in real time, saying she could hear him at the door, hear him breaking through. And we were hearing this while she was already gone. Did you ever find who did it? Campos shook her head. No viable suspects. No forensic evidence that survived the fire. The case went cold within 6 months. Officially, it's still open, but nobody's actively working it. She pulled out another document, this one older and more worn than the others. But here's the thing that really got to me. When I went digging into the building's history after that night, I found something interesting. Every death in apartment 3B follows the same pattern. What pattern? Someone reports a break-in or an intruder. Police respond, but arrive too late. Victim is found dead. And there's a fire. Every single time, going back to 1962. Different people, different circumstances, but the same basic sequence of events. Declan felt his skin prickle. That can't be coincidence. No, Campos agreed. It can't. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. I need someone to go back to that building and do a real investigation. Not just respond to a 911 call and clear the scene. Actually go through it. Document everything. Figure out what the hell is happening there. Why me? Because you've already been inside. Because you heard her voice, and you didn't try to convince yourself it was nothing. And because your record says you're the kind of cop who doesn't give up on a case just because it gets weird. She paused. Also, because everyone else I've asked has refused. Declan thought about Elliot's reaction at the diner, his insistence that they should never go back. He thought about the figure in the window, watching them leave. And he thought about Lena Fairchild's voice, still calling for help after 8 years of being dead. When do you want me to go? Tonight, Campos said. I'm assigning you and your partner to another night shift, but you'll be on special assignment. No regular patrol calls. Just focus on 742 Normandy. Elliot's not going to like this. Then find another partner. But Marrow, whatever you find in that building, I need you to document it. All of it. I don't care how crazy it sounds or how impossible it seems. I need a real record of what's happening there because something is happening. And it's been happening for a long time. Declan left the station with the file folder under his arm, his mind already working through what he'd need for tonight. Flashlights, extra batteries, recording equipment if he could get his hands on it, maybe a camera to document those glowing footprints if they appeared again. He called Elliot on the way to his car. No, Elliot said immediately. Whatever you're about to ask me, the answer is no. I haven't even said anything yet. You're going to ask me to go back to that building, and I'm telling you no. I'm done with this, Declan. I already put in for a transfer to day shift. Declan stopped walking. You did what? I can't do this anymore, man. I can't spend my nights wondering if I'm going to see something that shouldn't exist, or hear voices from dead people. I have a wife, Declan. I want to have kids someday. I can't do that if I'm jumping at shadows and having nightmares about glowing footprints. Elliot, I'm sorry. I know that makes me a coward or whatever, but I don't care. Find someone else to chase ghosts with you. The line went dead, and Declan stood in the parking lot staring at his phone. He understood Elliot's reaction, even respected it in a way. Not everyone was cut out for this kind of thing, and there was no shame in knowing your limits. But it left him with a problem. He needed a partner, and he needed someone who wouldn't run when things got strange. His phone rang, startling him. Unknown number again. Officer Marrow? A woman's voice, young and uncertain. My name is Tracy Hoffman. I'm a graduate student at UCLA studying urban folklore and paranormal investigation. I heard you responded to a call at 742 Normandy last night. How did you hear that? I monitor police scanners as part of my research. That building has been on my radar for years. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about what you experienced. Declan's first instinct was to hang up. The last thing he needed was some paranormal enthusiast turning his investigation into a ghost hunting expedition. But then he remembered what Campos had said about documentation, about building a real record of what was happening. What do you know about the building? He asked. Everything, Tracy said. I've been researching it for my dissertation. The history of the structure, the deaths, the reports of anomalous phenomena. I have interviews with former residents, historical records, architectural plans. If you're planning to investigate, I can help. What makes you think I'm planning to investigate? Because you went inside last night, and you're still asking questions. Most cops who encounter something strange there either convince themselves it was nothing, or they request to never be sent back. You're different. Declan made a decision that would have probably gotten him reprimanded if Campos knew about it. Can you meet me tonight, around midnight? At the building? Yeah. There was a pause, and he could hear the excitement in her voice when she answered. Yes, absolutely yes. Bring whatever documentation you have. And, Miss Hoffman, this isn't a ghost tour. This is an active investigation. If I tell you to leave or stay back or do anything else, you do it immediately. Understood? Understood. After hanging up, Declan spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. He went to an electronics store and bought 2 high-quality digital recorders, extra batteries, and a camera with night vision capability. He printed out all the information from Campos's file and organized it into a timeline, and he read everything he could find about Lena Fairchild. She'd been a graphic designer, lived alone, no criminal record, no known enemies. By all accounts, she was a normal 29-year-old woman living a normal life in Los Angeles, until the night someone broke into her apartment and killed her. The autopsy report was clinical and detailed. Cause of death was smoke inhalation, but she'd also suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She'd fought her attacker, fought hard, before the fire started. What bothered Declan most was the timeline. According to the 911 recordings, Lena had made her first call at 11:47 p.m. She'd sounded frightened but coherent, reporting that someone was trying to break into her apartment. Dispatch had logged the call and sent units to respond. But then the calls kept coming. At 11:52, 11:56, 12:01, 12:04. Each time, Lena's voice becoming more panicked, more desperate. In the final call at 12:07, she'd been screaming that he was breaking through the bathroom door, begging someone to help her. Police arrived at 12:15, found the building on fire, evacuated the other residents. Firefighters got the blaze under control by 12:45 and found Lena's body at 1:20 a.m. According to the medical examiner, she'd been dead since approximately 11:30 p.m., 15 minutes before her first 911 call. Declan read that line 3 times, making sure he understood it correctly. The medical examiner had been confident in the estimate, based on body temperature, rigor mortis, and other factors. Lena Fairchild had died at 11:30, give or take 15 minutes. But if that was true, then who had been making those 911 calls? The official explanation was that the ME's timeline was off, that Lena had lived longer than estimated. But sitting in his apartment reading the report, Declan knew that wasn't right. He'd heard her voice last night, heard her calling for help, 8 years after her death. Whatever had happened that night in 2015, it was still happening. And tonight, he was going to find out why. At 11:45 p.m., Declan pulled up to 742 Normandy Avenue for the second time in 24 hours. Tracy Hoffman was already there, standing next to a beat-up Honda Civic and clutching a backpack that looked like it weighed as much as she did. She was younger than he'd expected, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of nervous energy that came from equal parts excitement and fear. "Officer Marrow?" she said as he approached. "Just, Declan is fine. You came prepared." He nodded at the bulging backpack. "I have all my research, plus EMF detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders, the works. I know you said this isn't a ghost tour, but if we're going to document what's happening, we should use every tool available." Declan couldn't argue with that logic. "Fine, but I'm in charge. We go where I say, when I say, and if anything happens, anything at all that makes me think we're in danger, we leave immediately." "Agreed." They ducked through the gap in the fence and approached the building. In the moonlight, it looked even more desolate than it had the night before, like a wound in the fabric of the neighborhood. Broken windows reflected the streetlights in fragmented patterns, and the smell of old smoke and decay seemed stronger. "I've been here 3 times before," Tracy said quietly as they walked. "During the day, always during the day. I've never had the courage to come at night. What happened during the day? Nothing much. It's just a condemned building when the sun's up. Empty, quiet, depressing. But there's a feeling to it, you know, like something's waiting." They entered through the same back door Declan had used before. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the debris-strewn hallway. Tracy pulled out what looked like a small electronic device with a digital display. "EMF detector," she explained, seeing his curious look. "Measures electromagnetic fields. A lot of paranormal researchers believe spirits or anomalies cause fluctuations in electromagnetic energy. You believe that?" She gave him a tired smile. "I believe that we don't know what we don't know. If something's happening here, I want to measure it in every way possible." They made their way to the stairwell, and Declan noticed that Tracy's device started beeping softly. She looked at the display and frowned. "That's weird. We're getting a reading, but there's no power source in this building. Could it be wiring in the walls? Maybe, but..." She moved the detector around, and the beeping intensified as she pointed it toward the stairs. "The field is stronger going up, like there's a power source on the upper floors." They climbed slowly, and with each floor, the temperature dropped. By the time they reached the 3rd-floor landing, Declan could see his breath again, just like the night before. "Temperature drop," Tracy whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Classic sign of paranormal activity. Or a draft from broken windows," Declan countered. But even he didn't believe that. It was a warm September night outside. There was no natural explanation for it being this cold inside. The hallway stretched before them, and apartment 3B's door was closed again. Declan was certain they'd left it open when they fled the night before, but there it was, shut tight like it had never been touched. "Are you okay?" Tracy asked, and Declan realized he'd been staring at the door for a long moment. "Yeah, just... Last night that door was open when we left. Doors in old buildings can swing shut on their own, settling foundations, air pressure changes. Right." But Declan's hand moved to his service weapon anyway as they approached the door. Tracy's EMF detector was going crazy now, beeping rapidly and showing readings that made her eyes widen. "This is impossible. The field strength here is off the charts." It's like standing next to a power transformer. Declan reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked again. But it turned easily and the door swung open with that same groan of old hinges. The apartment beyond was exactly as they'd left it the night before. Empty, damaged, abandoned. No furniture, no lights, no signs of life. Except for one thing. In the center of the main room, lying on the dusty floor, was a telephone. An old rotary phone with a cloth-wrapped cord, the kind that hadn't been manufactured in decades. And next to it, arranged in a neat semicircle, were personal items. A hairbrush, a set of keys, a wallet, and a photograph in a cracked frame. "That wasn't here last night," Declan said quietly. Tracy was already photographing everything, her camera flash strobing in the darkness. "These items, we need to document them exactly as they are before we touch anything." Declan knelt down next to the objects, shining his flashlight on them. The photograph showed a young woman with a bright smile, standing in front of what looked like the ocean. He turned it over and found writing on the back. "Lena, Santa Monica, summer 2014. The wallet, when he carefully opened it, still contained Lena Fairchild's driver's license. "These are her things," Tracy breathed. "These belonged to the woman who died here. But they should be in evidence or returned to her family. They shouldn't be here, arranged like an offering or something." Before Tracy could respond, the phone rang. They both jumped, Tracy actually letting out a small scream before clapping her hand over her mouth. The phone's ring was shrill and mechanical, impossibly loud in the empty apartment. One ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. "Should we answer it?" Tracy whispered. Declan stared at the phone. Every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to leave, to get out of the apartment and the building and never come back. But he'd come here for answers, and somehow he knew that phone held them. On the 7th ring, he reached out and picked up the receiver. "Hello." For a moment, there was only static. Then, cutting through the interference, he heard a woman's voice. Not panicked or frightened like the 911 calls. Just sad. "Thank you for answering. No one ever answers anymore." "Lena?" Declan asked, his mouth dry. "Is this Lena Fairchild? I've been calling for so long, trying to warn them, but no one listens. They come, they look around, and then they leave. And it happens again. What happens again? He comes back. Every time. I can feel him in the building, moving through the halls, looking for the next one. I try to warn them, but no one stays long enough to hear." Tracy had her recorder pressed close to the phone, capturing every word. Her hands were shaking, but her face was determined. "Lena, who comes back? Who are you talking about?" "The man who killed me. He never left. He's still here, still hunting. And he's getting stronger." The temperature in the room plummeted even further, and Declan's breath came out in thick clouds. Tracy's EMF detector was screaming now, the pitch so high it was painful. "Where's he now?" Declan asked, even though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Behind you." Declan spun around, his hand going to his weapon. The apartment was still empty, still just an abandoned room with fire damage and broken windows. But in the doorway, barely visible in the beam of Tracy's flashlight, was a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It was the shape of a man, tall and broad-shouldered but wrong somehow. The edges of it seemed to blur and shift, like looking at something through water, and even though it had no features Declan could make out, he could feel it watching them. "We need to go," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Right now." But when he turned toward the door, the shadow was blocking their path. And from the phone receiver still clutched in his hand, Lena's voice whispered one final warning. Run. The shadow moved. It didn't walk or step or do anything that resembled normal human movement. It simply shifted position, and suddenly it was closer to them, blocking the doorway completely. The temperature in the room had dropped so low that Declan's fingers were going numb, and frost was forming on the edges of the broken windows. Tracy grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging in through his jacket. What do we do? Declan's training kicked in despite the impossibility of the situation. When confronted with a threat, you assessed your options, identified exits, and acted decisively. The problem was that every protocol he'd ever learned assumed the threat was human, bound by physical laws and limitations. This thing in the doorway was neither. He dropped the phone receiver and pulled Tracy toward the bathroom, the only other room in the apartment. It was a tactical retreat, buying them time to think, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, the bathroom door slammed shut behind them with enough force to crack the old wood. They were trapped in the same room where Lena Fairchild had died. There has to be another way out, Tracy said, her voice shaking as she swept her flashlight around the small space. But there was nothing. Just the broken sink, the cracked toilet, and that shattered mirror reflecting their terrified faces in fragmented pieces. Declan tried the door handle. It wouldn't budge, as if the entire mechanism had fused solid. He put his shoulder against it and pushed, but it was like trying to move a concrete wall. From the other side of the door they could hear something. Not footsteps exactly, but a sound like fabric dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. And underneath that, barely audible, was breathing. Heavy, labored breathing that didn't sound quite human. "Officer Marrow," Tracy whispered, and when he turned, he saw that she was pointing at the mirror. In the cracked glass, behind their reflections, was another figure. Not the shadow from the doorway, but a woman. She was standing right behind them, close enough to touch, but when Declan spun around, the bathroom was empty except for the two of them. He looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there in the reflection, though not quite transparent, not quite solid. She was wearing jeans and a blue sweater, and her face was bruised and bloodied. But her eyes were alert, focused, and filled with desperate urgency. Lena Fairchild. She was mouthing something, trying to speak, but no sound came out. Declan watched her lips move, trying to understand. "The floor," Tracy breathed. "She's saying something about the floor." Lena's reflection nodded frantically and pointed downward. Declan knelt and examined the bathroom floor with his flashlight. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just old tiles and accumulated grime. But then his light caught something. A slight gap between tiles near the base of the toilet, and when he pressed on them, they shifted. "Help me," he said to Tracy, and together they pried up the loose tiles. Beneath them was a section of rotted floorboard, and below that, darkness, a crawl space or access tunnel of some kind. The dragging sound outside the door grew louder, and now they could hear the doorknob rattling. Whatever was out there was trying to get in, and Declan had no illusions about what would happen when it succeeded. "We're going down," he said, pulling away more of the rotted boards. The opening wasn't large, but it was big enough for them to squeeze through if they were careful. Tracy looked at the dark hole with obvious terror. "We don't know where that leads. We know where staying here leads." Declan glanced at the mirror. Lena's reflection was still there, nodding encouragement, urging them to hurry. The bathroom door shuddered in its frame, and hairline cracks began spreading across its surface like a spider's web. They were out of time. Declan went first, lowering himself through the hole until his feet found purchase on something solid below. It was a tight fit, and he had to twist sideways to get his shoulders through. But then he was standing in what appeared to be a narrow maintenance corridor between floors. Tracy followed, dropping down beside him with a grunt. Above them, they heard the bathroom door finally give way with a crack like a gunshot. Whatever had been on the other side was now inside. "Move," Declan hissed, and they ran. The crawl space was barely 4 feet high, forcing them to move in an awkward crouch. Declan's flashlight revealed concrete walls on either side, with old pipes and electrical conduits running along the ceiling. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, and every few feet they had to navigate around support beams and debris. Behind them, they heard a sound that made Declan's blood freeze. Something was in the crawl space with them, and it was coming fast. Not the slow dragging sound from before, but a rapid scuttling that echoed off the concrete walls like an insect the size of a human. "Faster," he urged Tracy, but the space was so cramped and filled with obstacles that speed was nearly impossible. His knee caught on a protruding pipe and he stumbled, nearly going down. Tracy grabbed his jacket and pulled him forward, and they kept moving. The crawl space opened into a larger chamber, some kind of maintenance room with rusty tools hanging on the walls and a metal ladder leading up to a hatch in the ceiling. Declan hit the ladder at a run and started climbing, praying the hatch wasn't locked or blocked. Below, the scuttling sound grew deafening, and when Tracy screamed, he looked down to see something emerging from the crawlspace entrance. It was the shadow figure, but wrong, contorted into a shape that could navigate the low space. Its limbs bent at angles that violated human anatomy, and it moved with a horrible speed that defied physics. Declan slammed his shoulder against the hatch, and by some miracle, it gave way. He hauled himself up through the opening, then reached down to grab Tracy's hand. She was halfway up the ladder when the shadow thing reached her, and Declan felt her weight increase as something tried to pull her back down. "Don't let go," she screamed. Declan braced his feet against the edge of the hatch and pulled with everything he had. For a terrible moment, it was a tug of war with Tracy as the rope, and he could see the raw terror in her eyes as she felt herself being dragged in 2 directions. Then her backpack tore free, tumbling down into the darkness below, and suddenly she was lighter. Declan pulled her up through the hatch, and they both collapsed on solid ground, gasping for breath. They were in the building's basement, a maze of storage rooms and old mechanical equipment. Emergency lighting strips along the baseboards provided a dim glow, which should have been impossible in a building with no power, but Declan was beyond questioning impossibilities at this point. "My research," Tracy panted. "Everything was in that bag. All my documentation, my equipment, doesn't matter. We're alive." Declan got to his feet and helped her up. "We need to find a way out of here." But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The building didn't want them to leave. Whatever presence inhabited 742 Normandy Avenue, it had been waiting for someone to really investigate, to go beyond just responding to calls and clearing the scene. And now that they were here, really here, it wasn't going to let them walk away. They moved through the basement, following the emergency lighting toward what Declan hoped was an exit. The space was larger than he'd expected, stretching the full footprint of the building. Storage rooms branched off the main corridor, their doors hanging open to reveal ancient furniture, moldering boxes, and the accumulated debris of decades. In one room, Declan's flashlight caught something that made him stop. Filing cabinets, dozens of them, lined up against the walls. And on a table in the center of the room, spread out like someone had been reviewing them recently, were police reports. "What is this?" Tracy whispered, moving to examine the documents. Declan picked up one of the files. It was a homicide investigation from 1989, detailing the death of a woman named Margaret Vaughn in apartment 3B. The circumstances were chillingly familiar. 911 call reporting an intruder, police response delayed by a fire, victim found dead in the bathroom. Another file from 1978. Another woman, another break-in, another fire. Same apartment, same basic sequence of events. "He's been doing this for decades," Tracy said, her voice hollow. "The same pattern over and over, but why? What does he want?" Declan was about to answer when he noticed something else. Mixed in with the official police reports were other documents, personal notes written in a cramped, angry handwriting. He picked up one of the pages and read, "They don't understand. They can never understand. The building chooses them, not me. I'm just the instrument. Each one is a sacrifice, feeding the structure, making it stronger, making me stronger. Soon, I won't need the physical form at all. Soon, I'll be part of the building itself, eternal and unchanging." The note was signed with initials, DK. These aren't just victim files, Declan realized. This is his journal. Whoever's been killing these women, he's been documenting it, planning it. Tracy was going through filing cabinets, pulling out more folders. There are files here going back to the 1960s, but look at the dates. The first few deaths are years apart, but they get closer together. The most recent ones are only months apart. "He's accelerating," Declan said. "Getting better at it, or needing to do it more frequently. Or the building is getting hungrier," Tracy added. She'd found something else, a large ledger book filled with architectural drawings and notes. "These are plans for the building, but they've been modified. Look at this." She pointed to a drawing of the building's structure, but overlaid on the normal architectural elements were strange symbols and notations. Declan recognized some of them from cases he'd worked. Ritualistic markings, the kind used in occult practices. Whoever DK is, he's been using the building like some kind of, I don't know, like a trap or a battery. Each death feeds it, makes it stronger. "Which means Lena wasn't the last," Declan said grimly. "The calls are still coming because the building is still hunting. It's using her voice to lure people in." As if in response to his words, a phone began ringing somewhere in the basement. Not a cell phone, but that same old mechanical ring they'd heard in the apartment. It was coming from deeper in the storage area, beyond the room where they stood. "We should ignore it," Tracy said, but she was already moving toward the sound, and Declan followed. They found the phone in a small office space that had been set up in one of the storage rooms. A desk, a chair, and a rotary phone connected to nothing, just sitting there ringing. On the desk were more documents, and a photograph that made Declan's stomach turn. It showed apartment 3B, but not empty and abandoned like he'd seen it. This was from before, when it had been furnished and lived in, and standing in the center of the room, smiling at the camera, was a man Declan recognized. He'd seen that face before, in the station, in briefings, in the hallway. The photo was at least 20 years old, but there was no mistaking the features. Detective Eamon Redford. "Oh, God," Tracy breathed. She'd found a personnel file in one of the desk drawers. Eamon Redford, retired LAPD detective. He worked out of Central Division for 32 years, commendations for solving multiple homicide cases. He lived in this building, in apartment 3B. "When did he retire?" Declan asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Tracy checked the file. 2015. Right after... She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Right after Lena Fairchild died. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so disturbing that Declan wanted to reject it entirely. But it made a horrible kind of sense. A detective with inside knowledge of police procedures who knew how to stage a scene, how to delay response times, how to make evidence disappear. Someone who had lived in the building for decades, who had been killing women and covering it up, using his position to ensure the cases never got solved. "He killed them all," Declan said. "Every woman who died in that apartment, it was him." "But he retired years ago," Tracy said. The 911 calls are still coming. If he's dead or gone, he's not gone, a voice said from behind them. They spun around to find Sergeant Rita Campos standing in the doorway of the storage room. But something was wrong. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, but her eyes were empty, reflecting no light at all. The building wouldn't let him leave, she continued, and her voice had a strange quality to it, like multiple voices speaking in unison. He gave it too much, fed it too well. It consumed him, made him part of itself, and now I'm part of it too. Declan's hand moved to his weapon, but Campos moved faster than should have been possible. One moment she was in the doorway, the next she was standing between them and the exit, blocking their escape. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "You should have filed your report and forgotten about it like all the others. But you had to investigate, you had to dig deeper, and now the building knows you. It won't let you leave." "Rita," Declan said carefully, using her first name, trying to reach whatever part of his colleague might still be in there. "Fight this. Whatever this thing is, you're stronger than it. I'm not Rita anymore. She came here 3 days ago, trying to solve the mystery, trying to be a hero." The thing wearing Campos's face smiled, and the expression was all wrong. "The building took her. Just like it took Redford. Just like it will take you." Behind Campos in the doorway, other figures began to appear. Shadowy forms that might have been human once but were now something else. Declan recognized some of them from the photographs in the files. Women who had died in apartment 3B, now part of whatever this building had become. And in the center of them all, taller and more solid than the others, was a figure that could only be Eamon Redford. Even in death, even transformed into this thing, his detective's eyes were sharp and calculating. "You wanted to investigate," Redford's shade said, his voice like gravel scraping against concrete. "So, investigate. Become part of the case. Add your files to the collection. Your deaths will make the building stronger, and in time, you'll help it call the next ones." Tracy grabbed Declan's arm. "The hatch. We came through the hatch." But when they looked back the way they'd come, the corridor had changed. The basement had reconfigured itself, walls shifting into new positions, exits becoming dead ends. The building was alive, conscious, and it was adapting to keep them trapped. "There's no way out," Campos said, still smiling that horrible wrong smile. "There hasn't been a way out since the moment you entered. The building already has you." Declan refused to accept that. There was always a way out, always an option he hadn't considered. He looked around the storage room, his mind racing through possibilities. The files, the documents, the phone that was still ringing on the desk. The phone. "Tracy," he said quietly. "When we were in the apartment, Lena spoke to us through the phone. She warned us. So she's not completely consumed. Part of her is still fighting, still trying to help." He picked up the ringing phone, and Campos hissed, the sound distinctly inhuman. "Don't answer that," she commanded, but Declan was already pressing the receiver to his ear. "Lena, if you can hear me, we need help. We need to know how to get out of here." For a moment, there was only static. Then Lena's voice came through, weak but clear. "The fire. It's always been the fire. That's what breaks the pattern, what disrupts the building's hold. When Redford started the fires to cover his murders, he didn't realize he was creating weak points, places where the building's influence is damaged." Declan looked around the storage room at all the old documents and files. Decades of evidence, of documentation, all of it paper, all of it extremely flammable. "You're saying we need to burn our way out?" "The building won't burn," Lena said. "But fire disrupts it, creates chaos in its structure. It's the only thing Redford feared, the only thing that can hurt it. That's why it took him in the end, absorbed him before he could damage it further. Tracy had caught on to what Declan was thinking. We start a fire, it creates a distraction. But we'd need something to ignite. The emergency lighting, Declan interrupted. It's running on something, some kind of power source. If we can overload it, cause a short circuit. The figures in the doorway were moving closer now, Campos at their head. Redford's shade was reaching out with the hands that ended in fingers too long and jointed in too many places. You can't escape, Campos said. The building has already claimed you. Soon you won't even want to leave. Declan grabbed one of the emergency light strips from the baseboard and yanked it free, exposing the wiring beneath. Sparks flew and the lights flickered. Tracy, start piling documents near the electrical access panels. Everything paper, everything that will burn. She moved immediately, grabbing armfuls of files and reports and stacking them against the walls where electrical conduits ran. Declan tore free more lighting strips, creating more exposed wiring, more potential ignition points. Campos shrieked and lunged forward, but Declan was ready. He grabbed one of the old metal filing cabinets and toppled it, creating a barrier between them and the advancing figures. "Now!" he shouted, and touched an exposed wire to a stack of papers. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The documents, old and dry, caught fire instantly, and the flames spread with unnatural speed. Within seconds, half the storage room was ablaze, and the fire was climbing the walls, following the electrical conduits toward the ceiling. The figures recoiled from the flames, Campos screaming in a voice that was no longer even remotely human. The building itself seemed to shudder, and Declan felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. "The exit!" Tracy pointed to where a doorway had appeared in the wall, a door that hadn't been there moments before. The fire had disrupted the building's ability to manipulate the space. They ran for it, flames licking at their heels. Behind them, Redford's shade was roaring in rage, and Campos was trying to follow, but the fire created a barrier they couldn't cross. The door led to a stairwell, and they took the steps 3 at a time, climbing toward the ground level. The building shook around them, and Declan could hear the sound of things breaking, walls cracking, the structure protesting the damage being done to it. They burst out of a side entrance that Declan was certain hadn't been accessible before, stumbling into the cool night air. Behind them, smoke was pouring from the building's windows, and the orange glow of fire was visible through the gaps in the boarded-up entrance. "We have to call it in," Tracy gasped. "The fire department—" "No," Declan said, watching the flames spread through the condemned structure. "Let it burn. It's the only way to make sure it doesn't trap anyone else." They stood in the street and watched as 742 Normandy Avenue was consumed by fire for the second time in 8 years. This time, though, Declan could swear he heard voices in the flames. Not screams of pain, but something else. Relief, maybe. Release. The fire trucks arrived eventually, but by then the building was fully involved, the structure too far gone to save. The firefighters focused on containing the blaze, keeping it from spreading to neighboring properties. Declan watched until dawn, until the building was nothing but a smoking ruin, the walls collapsed and the interior completely destroyed. Whatever had been living in that place, whatever dark presence Redford had fed with his murders, it couldn't survive that level of destruction. "What are we going to tell them?" Tracy asked as the sun rose over the Los Angeles skyline. "How do we explain what happened?" Declan thought about it. The truth was impossible, unbelievable. But a lie felt wrong after everything they'd experienced. "We tell them we were investigating a cold case and discovered evidence of serial murders going back decades. We tell them Detective Eamon Redford was responsible and that he's been living in the building all this time. And we tell them that when we confronted him, he started the fire to destroy the evidence." "Is any of that true?" "All of it," Declan said. More or less. We just leave out the parts they wouldn't believe. Tracy nodded slowly. And Sergeant Campos? That was harder. Campos was gone, consumed by whatever the building had become. But without a body, without any evidence of what had really happened to her, all they could do was report her missing. We tell them she disappeared during the investigation, which is true. They gave their statements to the responding officers, careful to keep their story plausible and grounded in the physical evidence that would be found in the ruins. The files they'd seen in the basement would be destroyed, but there would be enough traces, enough remnants of Redford's documentation to support their account. As Declan finally headed home, exhausted and covered in soot, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but after the night he'd had, very little could surprise him anymore. Hello? Officer Marrow, this is Captain Reeves from Internal Affairs. I need you to come in for an interview regarding the events at 742 Normandy Avenue. Of course. A building burns down, an officer goes missing, and a retired detective gets implicated in a series of murders. Internal Affairs would want answers. When do you need me? This afternoon, if possible, and Officer Marrow, bring everything you have on Detective Redford. I have a feeling this case is going to open up a lot of old wounds. Declan hung up and stared at the smoking ruins of the building one last time. Old wounds indeed. But sometimes wounds needed to be opened before they could truly heal. He just hoped that destroying the building had been enough. That Lena Fairchild and all the other victims could finally rest. That whatever dark thing Eamon Redford had created was truly gone. But as he drove away, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the ashes. Tall, broad-shouldered, watching him with eyes that reflected no light at all. Some things he thought might be harder to kill than he hoped. The Internal Affairs interview room was deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. Hard chairs, fluorescent lighting that was just bright enough to give you a headache, and walls painted in a shade of beige that somehow managed to be both sterile and oppressive. Declan had been sitting across from Captain Raymond Reeves for almost 3 hours, walking through every detail of what had happened at 742 Normandy Avenue. Well, almost every detail. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Reeves said, his fingers steepled in front of him. You're telling me that you entered a condemned building based on 911 calls that were somehow originating from a location with no active phone service. Once inside, you discovered evidence linking retired Detective Eamon Redford to multiple homicides spanning several decades. And when you attempted to secure this evidence, a fire broke out that destroyed the entire structure. That's correct, sir. And Sergeant Rita Campos. Declan kept his expression neutral. She was investigating the building separately. I believe she discovered the same evidence we did. Her last known location was inside 742 Normandy before the fire started. We haven't been able to locate her since. Reeves studied him for a long moment. Declan could see the skepticism in his eyes, the unspoken questions about what had really happened. But without evidence to contradict his statement, there wasn't much the captain could do. The fire investigators found human remains in the basement, Reeves said. Badly burned, but preliminary analysis suggests they've been there for years, possibly decades. The coroner is working on identification, but given the state of the remains, it's going to take time. Redford's victims? That's the assumption. We're cross-referencing with missing person reports going back to the 1960s. Reeves pulled out a file and slid it across the table. We also found partial remains that are more recent. The dental work suggests they might belong to Sergeant Campos. Declan's stomach dropped. He'd known, logically, that Campos was gone, but hearing it confirmed, having physical evidence of her death, made it real in a way that witnessing her transformation hadn't. "I'm sorry," was all he could say. "So am I." she was a good cop. Reeves closed the file. What I don't understand is why Redford would still be in that building. He retired in 2015. Why not leave Los Angeles? Why stay in a condemned structure where he'd committed his crimes? Because the building wouldn't let him leave, Declan thought. Because he'd fed it so well that it consumed him, made him part of itself. But he couldn't say that out loud. I don't know, sir. Maybe guilt kept him there. Maybe he couldn't bear to leave the place where he'd spent so many years. Reeves didn't look convinced, but he moved on. We're conducting a full review of every case Redford worked during his time with the department. If he was killing women and using his position to cover it up, there might be other victims we don't know about yet. The files we saw suggested he was very organized, Declan said. He kept detailed records. If any of that survived the fire, it should help identify his victims. That's what we're hoping. Reeves stood, signaling the interview was over. You're on administrative leave until we complete our investigation. That's standard procedure for any officer-involved incident resulting in a death. Understood. And Marrow, if there's anything else you're not telling me, anything at all, now would be the time. Declan met his eyes. I've told you everything I can verify, sir. It was technically true. Everything he'd left out. The shadow entities, the building's supernatural hold, the voice of a dead woman guiding them to safety, couldn't be verified. It could barely be believed. And including it in his report would only undermine the real investigation into Redford's crimes. He left the station and found Tracy waiting for him in the parking lot. She looked as exhausted as he felt, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept any better than he had. How did it go? She asked. About as well as could be expected. They're treating it as a serial killer investigation now. Redford's being implicated in at least a dozen murders, possibly more. But they don't know about the other part. The building, the entities. No, and they won't. Declan leaned against his car. How are you holding up? Tracy gave a hollow laugh. I spent 4 years researching paranormal phenomena, convinced that if I could just document it properly, I could prove that there's more to this world than what we can see and measure. And now that I've actually experienced it, now that I have proof. She trailed off. I have nothing. My equipment is gone, my documentation is gone, and even if I tried to tell anyone what really happened, they'd think I was insane. Maybe that's for the best, Declan said quietly. Some things aren't meant to be proven. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Do you really believe that? He thought about it. A week ago, no. But now? Yeah, I think I do. Whatever was in that building, it was wrong. Not just evil, but fundamentally wrong. Reality doesn't work the way it's supposed to in places like that. And maybe it's better if people don't know that such places exist. Tracy nodded slowly. What about you? What are you going to do now? I'm on leave while Internal Affairs finishes their investigation. After that, he shrugged. Probably go back to night shift. Respond to calls. Help people where I can. Try not to think too much about condemned buildings and voices that shouldn't exist. Do you think it's really over? The building is gone, but Redford, I don't know, Declan admitted. I'd like to think that destroying the structure was enough. That whatever he became died with it. But I keep remembering that figure I saw in the ashes, watching me leave. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who'd glimpsed something they weren't meant to see and survived to tell a story no one would believe. If you ever need to talk about it, Tracy said finally, with someone who was there and knows what really happened, you have my number. Same to you. She got in her car and drove away, and Declan watched her go before heading to his own vehicle. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Officer Marrow, I wanted to thank you." He stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. "Who is this? You helped me. You listened when I called. Most people don't. Lena, the building is gone. I can feel it. Whatever bound me there, it's broken now. I'm free." Declan's hands were shaking as he typed his response. Are you at peace? I'm not in pain anymore. That's something. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. You saved people who would have been trapped there like I was. Thank you. What about Redford? What about the others?" There was a long pause before the response came. "He's still out there, weakened, diminished, but not gone. The building was his anchor, his source of power. Without it, he's just a shadow of what he was. But shadows can still hurt people if you're not careful. How do I stop him?" "I don't think you can. Not completely. But you can be watchful. You can listen when people call for help. You can be the kind of cop who doesn't give up on the impossible cases." Another message came through immediately after. "Be careful, Officer Marrow. Redford knows who you are now. He knows you hurt him. He'll remember that." Declan wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what had happened to Lena and where she was now, but no more messages came. After 5 minutes of waiting, he put his phone away and started his car. The drive home took him past the ruins of 742 Normandy Avenue. The building had been reduced to a blackened shell, its walls collapsed and its interior completely gutted. The city had already put up a chain-link fence around the entire property with signs warning of structural instability and environmental hazards. Declan slowed as he passed, and that's when he saw it. Standing among the debris, barely visible in the fading daylight, was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what might have been the remnants of a detective's coat. It stood perfectly still, and even from a distance Declan could feel its attention focused on him. Eamon Redford, or what was left of him. The figure raised one hand in what could have been a wave or a threat, and then it simply faded, becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. But Declan knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It was just waiting, gathering strength, preparing for whatever came next. He drove home and spent the evening going through everything he'd learned about Redford. The official personnel file painted a picture of a dedicated detective with an impressive clearance rate. 32 years on the force, numerous commendations, a reputation for being thorough and relentless. But now Declan could see the pattern underneath. Cases that went cold despite promising leads, witnesses who recanted their statements or disappeared, evidence that mysteriously went missing from lockup. Redford hadn't just been killing women. He'd been using the entire police department as cover, manipulating the system from the inside to ensure his crimes went undetected. And he'd been doing it for decades. Declan's phone rang, startling him out of his research. It was a number he recognized. Dispatch. "Officer Marrow, I know you're on administrative leave, but we have a situation I thought you should know about." "What kind of situation?" "We're getting 911 calls from a residential address in Echo Park. Female caller reporting an intruder in her home. But here's the thing. We've gotten the same call from the same address 3 times in the last hour, and each time we send a unit to check it out, there's no one there. Building appears vacant." Declan felt ice forming in his stomach. "What's the address?" The dispatcher gave him a street number in Echo Park, and Declan immediately pulled it up on his laptop. The property listing showed an older apartment building, similar in style and age to 742 Normandy Avenue. It had been condemned 2 months ago due to code violations and was scheduled for demolition. "Have any units responded to calls at that location before tonight?" "Let me check." A pause, then, "Yeah, looks like we've gotten sporadic calls from there over the past few weeks. Always the same complaint, intruder in the building, but nobody's ever there when we arrive. It was starting again. Redford was establishing a new anchor, a new hunting ground. Weakened, but not destroyed, he was reaching out, trying to rebuild what had been taken from him. "I'm coming in," Declan said. "You're on leave. I don't care. This is connected to the Normandy case. I need to check it out." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but before he left, his phone buzzed with another text message. He's already chosen his next victim, a woman who lives alone, who's been calling for help that never comes. If you don't stop him, she'll be like me, trapped and calling forever. There was no signature, but Declan knew it was from Lena. She was still watching, still trying to warn him, still trying to save the next victim from her fate. The drive to Echo Park took 20 minutes through evening traffic. The address was in an older neighborhood, similar to the area around Normandy. The building itself was a 3-story structure with boarded windows and a condemned notice on the front door. Declan parked across the street and sat watching the building. It looked empty, lifeless. Just another piece of urban decay waiting for the demolition crew. But he knew better now. He knew that some buildings held on to their darkness, that some places became infected with violence and never truly healed. His radio crackled to life even though he hadn't turned it on. Through the static, he heard a woman's voice. "Please, someone help me. He's in the building. I can hear him on the stairs. Please, I'm in apartment 2C. Please send someone." Declan had closed his eyes. He could ignore it. He could drive away, let someone else respond to the call, convince himself that it was just another glitch in the system or a prank caller. He could go home, sleep, try to forget about condemned buildings and voices that shouldn't exist. But he knew he wouldn't do that. Couldn't do that. He got out of his car and approached the building. The fence around the property had been cut in several places, creating easy access points. Someone had been here recently, and not just homeless people looking for shelter. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. Declan slipped through one of the gaps and made his way to the building's entrance. The boards covering the door had been pried loose, and when he pushed on it, the door swung open with barely a sound. Inside, the building was dark and silent. Emergency lighting strips along the baseboards cast a faint glow, just like at Normandy. The air was cold despite the warm evening outside, and Declan could see his breath misting in the beam of his flashlight. "LAPD," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. "If anyone's in here, make yourself known." No response, just the settling creaks of an old building and the distant sound of traffic outside. He moved deeper into the structure, checking rooms as he went. Everything was empty, stripped of anything valuable. Just another condemned building waiting to be torn down. But on the second floor, he found apartment 2C. The door was closed, and unlike the other apartments, there was a faint light visible beneath it, and from inside, he could hear movement. Declan drew his weapon and approached the door carefully. "This is the police. I need whoever's inside to come out with their hands visible." The movement stopped. Then, after a long moment, the door slowly opened. A woman stood in the doorway, young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair and frightened eyes. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, and she looked as solid and real as anyone Declan had ever seen. "Thank God," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been calling 911 for an hour. There's someone in the building. I can hear them moving around, and I can't get out because—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she looked past Declan into the hallway behind him. Her face went pale, and she took a step backward into the apartment. "He's here," she whispered. Declan spun around, raising his weapon. Standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, was the figure he'd seen in the ruins of Normandy. Eamon Redford's shade, taller and more solid than it should have been, its eyes reflecting no light at all. You can't save her. Redford's voice echoed through the hallway, sounding like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. She's already mine. She called, and I answered. That's how it works. She's not yours, Declan said, keeping his weapon trained on the shadow figure even though he knew bullets wouldn't stop it. And this building isn't yours either. I burned your anchor. I destroyed your hunting ground. You destroyed one building, Redford said, and Declan could hear the amusement in his voice. But Los Angeles is full of condemned structures, full of empty spaces where no one looks too closely. I don't need 742 Normandy anymore. I can start fresh, build something new, something stronger. The woman behind Declan made a small sound of terror, and he could feel her grabbing onto his jacket. Run, he said to her, without taking his eyes off Redford. Get out of this building and don't look back. But now. She ran, her footsteps echoing down the stairwell, and Declan heard the front door slam as she made it outside. One saved at least. One potential victim who wouldn't become another Lena Fairchild. Redford's shade moved closer, and Declan could see details now that made his skin crawl. The thing wasn't entirely solid. He could see the wall behind it, could see how it seemed to be composed of shadows and smoke held together by nothing but malice and will. You can't stop me, Officer Marrow. I've been doing this since before you were born. I know every trick, every loophole, every way to make someone disappear without raising suspicion. I was the best detective the LAPD ever had because I understood how killers think. I understood because I was one. You were a monster who used his badge to prey on innocent people. I was efficient, Redford corrected. And I would have continued indefinitely if that building hadn't gotten greedy. If it hadn't started calling out on its own, drawing attention. It betrayed me in the end, and for that, I'm almost glad you burned it down. Then why are you here? Why start again? Because it's what I am. What I've always been. The building didn't make me a killer, Officer Marrow. It just gave me a place to express my true nature. The shade smiled, and the expression was worse than anything Declan had seen in apartment 3B. And now I'm free of it. Free to hunt wherever I want, whenever I want. You've actually done me a favor. Declan's mind was racing, trying to find a way to stop this thing. Fire had worked at Normandy, but he didn't have time to set this building ablaze. And even if he did, Redford had just admitted he could move to another location. What do you want? He asked, stalling for time. I want you to understand something, Redford said, moving closer still. You can't save them all. You can investigate all you want, burn down every condemned building in Los Angeles, and it won't matter. Because I'm patient, I can wait years between kills if I need to. I can move to different cities, different states. I'm not bound to one location anymore. But you're not as strong as you were, Declan observed. I can see it. You're barely holding yourself together. Without the building to anchor you, you're just a shadow. You can frighten people, maybe even touch them, but you can't kill the way you used to. The shade's smile vanished. I'm strong enough. Are you? Because if you were, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. You'd have already taken that woman. But you let her go because you couldn't stop her from running. You're weak, Redford, and you're getting weaker. The shade lunged forward, and Declan felt a terrible cold wash over him as it passed through his body. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand frozen while darkness clouded his vision. Then it was past him, and he was on his knees, gasping for air. Redford's shade was at the end of the hallway again, and this time it looked less solid, more transparent. You know nothing, it hissed. I'll rebuild my strength, feed again, and when I do, you'll be the first one I visit, you and that little researcher who helped you. I'll make you both regret what you did to me. Then it was gone, fading into the shadows like it had never been there at all. Declan stayed on his knees for a long moment, waiting for his strength to return. His radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice asking for his status, and he managed to get to his feet and respond. "I'm clear. Building is empty. Send a unit to secure the location and make sure that chain-link fence gets properly repaired. No one should be able to access this building." "Copy that. Are you okay, Officer Marrow? You sound—" "I'm fine, just tired." He made his way out of the building and found the woman he'd saved standing by his car, wrapped in a blanket that one of the responding officers must have given her. She looked up as he approached. "What was that thing?" she asked. "That wasn't a person. That was—" "I don't know what it was," Declan lied. "But it's gone now. You're safe. I heard it talking to you. It said it would come back, that it would start again somewhere else." Declan didn't have a good answer for that, so he just nodded. "Are you going to stop it?" she pressed. "Are you going to make sure it can't hurt anyone else?" He wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise her that he'd hunt Redford's shade down and destroy it completely. But he'd learned enough in the past few days to know that some promises couldn't be kept. "I'm going to try," he said instead. "That's all I can guarantee." She seemed to accept that, and after giving her statement to the other officers, she was taken to the station for a more detailed interview. Declan stayed behind, making sure the building was properly secured and that the condemned notices were reinforced. As he worked, his phone buzzed with another message from Lena. "You saved her. Thank you. Redford says he's going to rebuild, find another anchor point. He will, but he's weak now, and he knows you're watching. That will make him cautious. It might buy time for his next victim to escape, like the woman tonight. That's not good enough. There has to be a way to stop him permanently. Maybe there is, but I don't know it. I was just one of his victims. I don't understand what he's become any better than you do." Declan leaned against his car, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over him. "What happens to you now? Are you really free?" "I think so. The calls have stopped. I don't feel the building pulling at me anymore. I can rest now. I'm glad. Officer Marrow." "Declan, there's something you should know. Redford wasn't alone. There are others like him. Other buildings with their own darkness. Other killers who've learned to cheat death by binding themselves to places. What happened at Normandy wasn't unique. It was just the first time anyone bothered to investigate deeply enough to understand it." The implications of that hit Declan like a physical blow. How many other condemned buildings in Los Angeles might be anchoring similar entities? How many other voices were calling out for help that never came? "How many?" he asked. "I don't know. More than you'd want to believe. This city is old, and it has a lot of dark corners. What am I supposed to do with that information? Whatever you think is right. You're the kind of cop who listens when people call, who doesn't give up on impossible cases. The world needs more people like that." The messages stopped after that, and despite waiting for another hour, no more came. Eventually, Declan drove home and collapsed into bed, but sleep was elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that figure in the hallway, heard Redford's voice promising to return. The next morning, he woke to a call from Captain Reeves. "Officer Marrow, I wanted to let you know that we've identified some of the remains found at Normandy. DNA matches confirm at least 8 victims, all women who were reported missing between 1965 and 2010. We're still working on the others. And Sergeant Campos? Dental records confirm she was among the deceased. I'm sorry, Declan. I know you two had worked together. Thank you for letting me know, sir. There's something else. We found a ledger in the ruins, partially burned but still readable. It appears to be a list of names and dates. We think it's Redford's kill list. There are 37 names on it going back to 1962. 37 women. 37 victims whose deaths Redford had documented like they were case files, like they were just another part of his job. "We're opening investigations into each name on the list," Reeves continued. "It's going to take months, maybe years, to sort through it all, but we're going to make sure every victim is identified and their families notified." "That's good, sir. Your administrative leave is lifted. You're cleared to return to duty whenever you're ready." Declan thought about that. Thought about going back to night shift, responding to calls, trying to help people. But he also thought about what Lena had told him, about other buildings with their own darkness, other killers who'd learned to cheat death. "Actually, sir, I wanted to request a transfer." "To where?" "I want to work cold cases. Specifically, I want to look into unsolved disappearances and murders that might be connected to condemned or abandoned buildings." There was a long pause. "That's an unusual request. I know, but after what we found at Normandy, I think there might be other cases out there that have been overlooked. Other patterns that no one's noticed because they seem too strange to be real." "You really think there are more situations like this?" More than you'd want to believe, Declan thought. But out loud, he said, "I think it's worth investigating, sir." Another pause, then, "All right, I'll see what I can do. But Marrow, this kind of work, it can consume you if you let it. Don't lose yourself in the darkness trying to fight it." "I'll be careful, sir." He hung up and sat in his apartment, thinking about the choice he'd just made. He could have gone back to regular patrol, back to the routine calls and normal police work. Instead, he'd volunteered to dive deeper into the kind of cases that most cops tried to avoid. His phone buzzed one final time. Another message from an unknown number, but he knew who it was before he even read it. "Thank you for not forgetting about us. For all of us who called and no one answered. You're doing the right thing." Declan saved the message and got up to make coffee. He had work to do. Files to review, patterns to identify, buildings to investigate. Somewhere out there, another condemned structure might be harboring another Eamon Redford. Another voice might be calling for help that never came, but this time, someone would be listening. This time, someone would answer. He pulled out his laptop and started searching through our LAPD databases, looking for unsolved cases connected to abandoned buildings. The list was longer than he expected, spanning decades and covering every corner of the city. As he worked, the sun set outside his window, and Los Angeles transformed into its nighttime self. Millions of lights flickered on across the basin, each one representing a person, a life, a story. And among all those lights were dark spaces where no illumination reached, where condemned buildings stood silent and waiting. Declan knew he couldn't save everyone, knew he couldn't investigate every abandoned structure or solve every impossible case, but he could try. He could be the kind of cop who listened when others wouldn't, who investigated when others gave up. His phone rang, and without looking at the caller ID, he knew it was dispatch. He could already hear the pattern in his mind, a 911 call from an address that didn't make sense, a voice asking for help from a place that should be empty. He answered the call. "Officer Marrow, we have a situation I thought you should know about." And somewhere in the darkness of Los Angeles, in a condemned building that hadn't been touched in years, a phone began to ring. On the 7th ring, someone would answer. But this time, someone was coming to help. This time, the call wouldn't go unanswered. Declan Marrow closed his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. The night shift was calling, and he had work to do. Behind him, barely visible in the reflection of his apartment window, a figure stood watching. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that reflected no light. Eamon Redford's shade, diminished but not destroyed, patient and waiting. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in decades, Redford faced an opponent who understood what he was. An officer who wouldn't stop investigating, wouldn't accept easy explanations, wouldn't let the impossible cases remain unsolved. The shadow faded as Declan left his apartment, but it would return. It always did. Some darkness can never be completely destroyed, but it can be fought. And that, Declan Marrow decided as he drove through the Los Angeles night toward another call from another impossible address, would have to be enough. The fog rolled in off the Pacific just after 10 o'clock, thick and white and completely unforgiving. It swallowed the coastal highway in minutes, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet on a good stretch, and almost nothing when it got particularly dense. Jonah Kincaid had been patrolling this section of Highway 1 for 6 years, and he'd learned to respect the fog the way sailors respect the ocean, with a healthy mixture of caution and acceptance that sometimes it was just going to do what it wanted, regardless of human plans. Tonight's fog was bad, even by Pacific Coast standards. The kind that made headlights useless, bouncing the light back into your eyes until you were better off driving by feel and memory than by sight. The kind that made the center line disappear and turned the guardrails into ghostly suggestions that appeared and vanished without warning. The kind that killed people if they weren't careful. Jonah kept his patrol car at a steady 30 miles per hour, well below the posted limit, but as fast as he felt comfortable going in these conditions. His spotlight swept the shoulder periodically, checking for broken-down vehicles or anyone stupid enough to be walking along the highway in this soup. He'd already called in twice to confirm his position with dispatch, standard procedure when visibility got this poor. The radio crackled with light static, a side effect of the fog playing hell with the signal towers along the coast. All units, be advised, we have a fog advisory in effect for the coastal zones. Multiple reports of accidents on Highway 1 between Big Sur and Carmel. Exercise extreme caution. 10-4, Jonah responded, though he was already being as cautious as humanly possible. You didn't last long on coastal patrol if you took the fog lightly. He'd been driving for another 15 minutes, creeping along through the white void, when his headlights caught something that made him ease off the gas even more. There was a vehicle on the shoulder ahead, pulled over with its hazard lights blinking in a slow hypnotic rhythm. The fog created a halo effect around the lights, making them seem to pulse and breathe. Jonah activated his own lights and pulled in behind the vehicle, leaving enough distance that he could maneuver if needed. It was a Honda Accord, maybe 5 or 6 years old, dark blue or black. Hard to tell in the fog and the strange interplay of emergency lights. The engine was still running. He could see exhaust mixing with the fog, and the hazards were blinking steadily. He radioed it in. Dispatch, I've got a vehicle on the shoulder at mile marker 47 northbound lane. Appears occupied but unresponsive. Running a plate check now. He wrote down the license plate number and called it in, then grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his patrol car. The fog immediately wrapped around him like a cold, damp blanket. The sound of the ocean was close, maybe 100 feet down the cliff to his right, but he couldn't see it. Couldn't see much of anything beyond the weak cones of light from his flashlight and the still running Accord. Jonah approached the vehicle carefully, one hand on his flashlight and the other near his service weapon. Standard traffic stop procedure, even though something about this situation felt off in a way he couldn't quite identify. The car was just sitting there with its engine running and its hazards on, but there was no sign of the driver trying to flag him down or get his attention. As he got closer, his flashlight beam revealed more details. The driver's side window was down despite the cold and the fog. The interior light was on, casting a weak yellow glow that didn't quite reach the corners of the cabin. And through the window, he could see that the driver's seat was empty. "Hello?" Jonah called out, sweeping his flashlight around the immediate area. "This is the California Highway Patrol. If you need assistance, please make yourself known." Nothing. Just the sound of the idling engine, the rhythmic click of the hazard lights, and the distant crash of waves against rocks far below. Jonah reached the driver's door and shined his light inside. The car was definitely empty. No driver, no passengers. But it didn't look abandoned in the usual sense. The keys were in the ignition, the engine running smoothly. A purse sat on the passenger seat, along with what looked like a half-eaten sandwich in a clear plastic container. A travel mug of coffee was in the cup holder, still steaming slightly in the cold air. Whatever had happened here, it had happened recently. Very recently. He tried the door handle. Unlocked. The interior of the car was clean, well-maintained, with none of the accumulated debris that usually characterized a vehicle in distress. On the passenger seat, next to the purse, was a spiral-bound notebook. Jonah carefully picked it up and flipped it open. The pages were filled with handwriting, neat and controlled. Notes about meetings, appointments, what looked like work schedules. And then, about halfway through, the handwriting changed. Became more rushed, more erratic. The last entry, dated today, read, "Something's following me. I can see it in the rearview mirror when the fog shifts. Not a car. Not anything that makes sense. I need to pull over. I need to think." The entry ended there, the pen apparently dropped mid-thought. Jonah felt a cold sensation that had nothing to do with the fog creeping down his spine. He stepped back from the car and swept his flashlight in a wider arc, searching the shoulder, the edge of the cliff, anywhere someone might have gone. "Hello? California Highway Patrol. If you can hear me, please respond." His voice seemed to die in the fog, absorbed by it rather than echoing. It was a phenomenon he'd experienced before in heavy fog, sound behaving strangely, getting muffled or distorted. But tonight it felt more pronounced, like the fog wasn't just blocking sound but actively consuming it. Dispatch crackled through his radio. "Unit 37, we have results on that plate. Vehicle is registered to Mira Holloway, female, 32 years old. Residence in Monterey. No wants, no warrants. Vehicle is not reported stolen." Copy that. Vehicle appears to have been abandoned recently, engine still running, personal effects inside. No sign of the driver. I'm going to conduct a search of the immediate area. 10-4. Do you need backup? Jonah considered it. Standard procedure for a potential missing person would be to call for additional units, get a proper search going. But in this fog, additional units wouldn't be able to do much more than he could alone. And whatever had happened to Mira Holloway had happened within the last few minutes, based on the still warm coffee and the running engine. Negative for now. I'll update in 15 minutes. He started a systematic search of the area around the vehicle, working in expanding circles. The fog made it slow going, and he had to be careful near the edge of the cliff where the shoulder dropped off into nothing. The guardrail was intact in this section, but there were gaps and weak points that someone could slip through if they weren't careful. About 30 feet from the car, near one of those gaps in the guardrail, Jonah found something that made him stop. Footprints in the soft dirt at the edge of the shoulder, leading toward the cliff. Small footprints, probably a woman's shoe size. They approached the gap in the guardrail and then stopped, not turned around, not continued in another direction. Just stopped, as if whoever made them had simply vanished at that exact spot. Jonah leaned over the guardrail carefully, shining his flashlight down into the fog below. He couldn't see much. The cliff face disappeared into white nothingness after maybe 10 feet, but he listened for any sound of someone down there. A cry for help, rocks falling, anything, nothing. Just the waves. He was about to call it in, request a full search and rescue operation, when his radio erupted with static so loud and sudden that he actually dropped his flashlight. It clattered against the pavement, the beam spinning wildly and creating strobing shadows in the fog. Through the static, cutting in and out, he heard a voice. Female, distorted, barely comprehensible. "Help, can't see, following me, won't stop. Hello?" Jonah grabbed his radio. "This is Unit 37. I can barely read you. Please repeat." More static, and then the voice again, clearer this time but with a strange quality to it, like it was coming from very far away or being filtered through water. "It's in the fog. I can see it when the fog moves. It's been following me since Big Sur. Please, someone help me. I'm so cold." "Ma'am, this is the California Highway Patrol. What's your location? Are you Mira Holloway?" "I don't know where I am. Everything looks the same." "The road, the fog, it all looks the same. I've been driving for hours, but I can't find anywhere to stop that feels safe." Jonah's mind was racing. The voice on the radio had to be coming from a cell phone or a CB radio, but the signal was wrong. It was coming through on his police frequency, which shouldn't be possible unless she had access to emergency services radio equipment. "Mira, listen to me carefully. I'm standing next to your vehicle right now. It's on the shoulder at mile marker 47. Your engine is still running. Where are you?" A long pause filled with static, and then, "My car? No, I'm still driving. I can see the headlights cutting through the fog. I can see the center line. I'm still on Highway 1. Jonah looked at the empty Accord, at the keys in the ignition, and the coffee still steaming in the cup holder. "Ma'am, I need you to look at your surroundings. Can you see any mile markers? Any landmarks?" I passed mile marker 47 a while ago, I think. Or maybe I'm about to pass it. It's hard to tell. The fog makes everything look the same. This wasn't making sense. Jonah walked back to the Accord and checked the interior again, making absolutely sure it was empty. It was. The car was definitely here, definitely abandoned. So how could Mira Holloway be calling him from the same car while claiming she was still driving? "Mira, I need you to pull over. Stop your vehicle and wait for me to find you. Can you do that?" I tried to pull over. I did pull over. But when I stopped, I saw it getting closer. In the mirrors, in the fog. So I started driving again. If I keep moving, it can't quite reach me. What can't reach you? What are you seeing? Another burst of static, longer this time. When her voice came back, it sounded more distant, more frightened. "I don't know what it is. It's shaped like a person, but it moves wrong. And its eyes, God, its eyes don't reflect light right. They're just dark spots where eyes should be. It's been following me for miles and miles, and I can't outrun it because I can't drive fast enough in this fog." Jonah's hand tightened on his radio. Every rational part of his brain was telling him this was some kind of prank or technical glitch. But he'd found the notebook, had read that last entry about something following her, and the fear in her voice was real, even through the distortion and static. "Mira, I'm going to find you. Keep talking to me. Tell me what you see." "I see. There's a turnout coming up, one of those scenic overlooks. Should I pull over there? Maybe I can get out and run for help." "No," Jonah said immediately, remembering the footprints that led to the cliff and then disappeared. "Don't get out of your car. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. I'm coming to you." He ran back to his patrol car and got in, already putting it in gear. If Mira was somewhere up ahead on the highway, he needed to find her before whatever she was running from, real or imagined, caught up with her. But as he pulled back onto the highway and started driving north, a thought occurred to him that made his blood run cold. He'd found footprints leading to the cliff edge. Small footprints, the kind a woman like Mira Holloway would make. What if she hadn't called him from the car? What if she'd already gone over the cliff and what he was hearing on the radio was something else entirely? He pushed the thought away and focused on driving, sweeping his spotlight along the shoulder looking for any sign of another vehicle or a person on foot. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, if that was possible, and he was having to slow down to 20 miles per hour just to avoid running off the road. His radio crackled again. Unit 37, this is dispatch. We're getting reports from other units in your area of radio interference and possible equipment malfunction. Are you experiencing any issues? Affirmative. I've been receiving what sounds like distress calls on our frequency, but I can't verify the source. Copy that. We're getting similar reports from units 42 and 58. They're also reporting seeing vehicles on the shoulder that disappear when they approach. Jonah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Dispatch, say again? Vehicles that disappear? That's what they're reporting. Unit 42 said he saw a car on the shoulder with its hazards on, but when he pulled over to investigate, there was nothing there. Unit 58 reported the same thing about 10 minutes ago. Jonah thought about the Accord he'd left behind at mile marker 47. Was it still there? Or had it somehow vanished like the other reports? Dispatch, can you send a unit to mile marker 47 to verify the vehicle I called in is still present? 10-4 will advise. He continued driving north, his eyes straining against the fog, and then, maybe a quarter mile ahead, he saw them. Hazard lights blinking in that same slow rhythm, creating the same halo effect in the fog. Another car on the shoulder. Jonah slowed and approached carefully, already calling it in. As he got closer, details emerged from the white void. It was a Honda Accord, dark blue or black, with its engine running and its driver's side window down. The exact same car he'd left behind at mile marker 47. He checked his position. He was at mile marker 51, 4 miles north of where he'd found Mira Holloway's vehicle. But this car was identical. Same make, same model, same color, same license plate when he got close enough to check. Impossible. He pulled over and approached on foot, his flashlight cutting through the fog. The interior was the same. Keys in the ignition. Purse on the passenger seat. Half-eaten sandwich, steaming coffee. Even the notebook was there, open to the same page with the same rushed handwriting. Something's following me. Jonah backed away from the car, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The rational explanation was that there were 2 identical cars, both belonging to Mira Holloway, both abandoned on the same stretch of highway on the same night. But that explanation was so improbable, it bordered on impossible. The other explanation, that the car had somehow moved 4 miles north while he was driving, staying just ahead of him, was even more impossible. His radio crackled. "Help me, please. It's getting closer. I can see it in the passenger side mirror now. Oh God, it's reaching for the window." "Mira!" Jonah shouted into his radio. "Where are you? What mile marker?" I don't know. Everything looks the same and I can't..." The transmission cut off, replaced by static and then silence. Jonah stood next to the impossible duplicate car, surrounded by fog so thick it felt like being underwater, and felt the first real stirrings of fear. Something was very wrong on Highway 1 tonight. Something that went beyond fog and lost drivers and radio interference. He got back in his patrol car and sat there for a moment, trying to think clearly. He needed to approach this logically, treat it like any other investigation. Facts first, speculation later. Fact, a vehicle registered to Mira Holloway was on the shoulder at mile marker 47. Fact, an identical vehicle, possibly the same vehicle, was now at mile marker 51. Fact, he was receiving radio transmissions from someone claiming to be Mira Holloway, describing impossible circumstances. Fact, other units were reporting similar phenomena, vehicles appearing and disappearing, radio interference, equipment malfunction. The logical conclusion was that something about the fog was causing mass hallucinations or equipment failures. Except Jonah didn't feel like he was hallucinating. The car in front of him was solid and real. He could touch it, could smell the exhaust from its running engine. A flash of movement in his peripheral vision made him turn. Through the fog, maybe 30 feet away, he saw a figure standing near the cliff edge. Dark clothes, long hair moving in the wind, facing away from him toward the ocean. "Ma'am," Jonah called out, grabbing his flashlight and getting out of his car. "Ma'am, are you Mira Holloway?" The figure didn't respond or turn around. It just stood there at the edge of the cliff, perfectly still despite the wind that was starting to push the fog into shifting patterns. Jonah approached slowly, his flashlight trained on the figure. As he got closer, he could make out more details. It was definitely a woman, wearing dark jeans and a jacket. Her hair was blowing in the wind, strands whipping across her face. She was standing right at the edge of the cliff, close enough that one more step would send her over. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the edge. Can you hear me?" Still no response. The woman just stood there, and now that Jonah was closer, he could see that she wasn't quite standing on solid ground. Her feet were hanging over the edge, suspended in midair, as if she was standing on something invisible, or as if she was falling, frozen in the moment before impact. Jonah's hand moved to his service weapon, not because he felt threatened, but because he needed something solid and real to hold on to. This couldn't be happening. People didn't float in midair. The fog couldn't be so thick that it created hallucinations this vivid. "Mira," he called out, taking another step closer. "Is that you?" The woman's head turned slowly, with a movement that reminded Jonah of a mannequin being rotated on a display stand. Her face emerged from behind the curtain of her hair, and Jonah felt his breath catch in his throat. It was her. The face matched the driver's license photo he'd pulled up when he ran the plates. Mira Holloway, 32 years old, Monterey resident. But her eyes were wrong, not quite focused, staring at something beyond Jonah, beyond the highway, beyond anything in the physical world. And she was mouthing words, her lips moving in a silent repetition of the same phrase over and over. Jonah read her lips. "It's following me. It's following me. It's following me." He reached out toward her, and the moment his fingers were about to make contact, she wasn't there anymore. The figure simply vanished, leaving nothing but fog and the sound of waves crashing far below. Jonah staggered backward, his heart hammering in his chest. His radio crackled to life again, and this time it was dispatch with an edge of urgency in the voice. "All units on Highway 1. We have a report of a vehicle over the cliff near mile marker 52. Coast Guard has been notified and is responding. All available units proceed to that location to assist." Mile marker 52, less than a mile north of where Jonah was standing. He ran back to his patrol car and drove north, his lights and siren cutting through the fog. The mile markers crawled by, 51.5, 51.75, and then he saw the flashing lights of another patrol car already on scene. Jonah pulled over and recognized the other officer immediately, Rhett Calloway, another CHP officer who worked the coastal route. Rhett was standing near a gap in the guardrail, shining his flashlight down into the fog below. "Rhett," Jonah called out as he approached. "What do we have?" Rhett turned, and Jonah could see the shock on his face. "Jonah, it's the weirdest thing. I was driving north when I saw a car go through the guardrail. Happened right in front of me, but when I stopped to look, there's no car down there. No debris, no skid marks, nothing." "What kind of car?" "Honda Accord. Dark blue, maybe black. Happened so fast I didn't get a plate, but I saw it clear as day. One second it was on the road, the next it was through the guardrail and over the edge." Jonah felt his skin prickling. "Did you see the driver? That's the other weird thing. I couldn't tell if there was anyone in it. The windows were all fogged up, and with this soup out here..." Rhett gestured at the oppressive white void around them. "I called it in immediately, but now I'm wondering if I imagined the whole thing." "You didn't imagine it," Jonah said quietly. He told Rhett about finding Mira Holloway's car, about the radio transmissions, about the figure at the cliff edge. With each detail, Rhett's expression grew more troubled. "That's not possible," Rhett said when Jonah finished. "Cars don't teleport up the highway. Dead people don't stand on thin air. This has to be the fog messing with us, playing tricks on our perception." "Then explain the car you saw go over the cliff that left no evidence," Jonah challenged. "Explain why multiple units are reporting the same kind of anomalies tonight." Rhett didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4-2. We're going to need search and rescue down here, full team. And I want to know if there have been any other reports of strange activity on Highway 1 tonight. Not just from CHP, but from civilians too." The response came back almost immediately. "Unit 4-2, we've had 17 calls in the last hour from drivers on Highway 1 reporting seeing vehicles that disappear, hearing voices on their car radios, and experiencing severe disorientation. We've closed the highway north of Carmel due to the fog, but we still have officers in the area responding to calls." 17 reports. This wasn't just Jonah and Rhett experiencing something strange. This was widespread, affecting multiple people across miles of coastline. "What the hell is going on tonight?" Rhett muttered. Jonah walked to the gap in the guardrail and looked down into the fog. Somewhere far below was the Pacific Ocean, cold and dark and utterly indifferent to human confusion. And somewhere in this fog, Mira Holloway was either dead, missing, or caught in something that defied explanation. His radio crackled again, and this time the voice was different. Clearer, more present, but with an underlying quality that made Jonah's blood run cold. "You can't help me. No one can help me. I'm already gone, but I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you it was following me." "Mira, where are you?" "I'm everywhere on this highway now. Every car on the shoulder, every figure in the fog, every voice on the radio. I didn't go over the cliff, Officer Kincaid. I became part of the fog. And now I'm trying to warn everyone else before it happens to them too." Before what happens? Before it catches them. The thing that followed me from Big Sur. The thing that lives in the fog and feeds on people who travel alone. It's still out there, still hunting. And tonight, with the fog this thick, it's stronger than I've ever felt it. The transmission ended, and Jonah stood there in the cold and the fog, trying to process what he'd just heard. Rhett was watching him with an expression that suggested he'd heard it too. "Did she just say..." Rhett began, but Jonah cut him off. "We need to find that car, the real one. Mile marker 47, that's where I first found it. Let's go back and confirm it's still there." They drove south in convoy, their patrol cars cutting through the fog at a crawl. When they reached mile marker 47, the car was still there. Same Honda Accord, same running engine, same personal effects inside. But now there was something else. Written in the condensation on the windshield from the inside were 2 words, "Still following." And in the rearview mirror, barely visible through the fog that had somehow gotten inside the car despite all the windows being up, was a dark shape. Humanoid, but wrong, with eyes that were just empty voids where light should have reflected. The shape that Mira Holloway had been running from since Big Sur. The shape that was still hunting on Highway 1 tonight. Jonah and Rhett stood staring at the message on the windshield. neither of them willing to voice what they were both thinking. The condensation was fresh, the letters still clear and dripping slightly. Someone, or something, had written those words from inside the car within the last few minutes. "We need to search the vehicle," Rhett said finally, his voice tight. "Procedure says we need to clear it, make sure there's no one hiding inside." Jonah nodded, though every instinct he had was screaming at him to get back in his patrol car and drive away. Instead, he drew his weapon and approached the Honda Accord from the driver's side while Rhett covered the passenger side. "California Highway Patrol," Jonah called out, his voice swallowed by the fog almost immediately. "If anyone is in this vehicle, show your hands and exit slowly." No response. Just the steady idle of the engine and the rhythmic click of the hazard lights. Jonah reached for the driver's door handle and pulled it open in one smooth motion, stepping back with his weapon raised. The interior light was still on, illuminating the empty cabin. He could see into the back seat, also empty. No one was hiding in the car, but the message on the windshield was still there. And now that he was closer, Jonah could see handprints on the inside of the glass. Small handprints like someone had been pressing against the windshield from the inside, trying to get out. Or trying to warn someone on the outside. Rhett circled around to join him, holstering his weapon. This doesn't make any sense. If Mira Holloway went over the cliff, why is her car still here? And if she didn't go over the cliff, where is she? "I don't think she went over the cliff," Jonah said slowly, thinking about the figure he'd seen suspended in midair, about the voice on the radio claiming to be part of the fog now. At least not in any way that we can investigate with normal search and rescue. "What are you saying?" Before Jonah could answer, both of their radios crackled simultaneously. This time, it wasn't Mira's voice, but dispatch, and the tension in the dispatcher's tone was evident. "All units on Highway 1, we have multiple emergency calls coming in from civilians reporting vehicles driving the wrong way on the highway. Callers describe seeing cars traveling south in the northbound lanes, appearing suddenly out of the fog. Be advised, we cannot confirm these sightings and recommend extreme caution." Jonah and Rhett exchanged glances. Wrong-way drivers in heavy fog were a death sentence waiting to happen, but something about this report felt connected to everything else happening tonight. "Dispatch, this is Unit 37, Jonah said into his radio. "Can you provide descriptions of these wrong-way vehicles? Stand by." A pause, then. Multiple callers have reported seeing a dark-colored Honda Accord traveling south in the northbound lanes. Vehicle appears and disappears in the fog. No plate information available. Of course, it was a Honda Accord. Of course it was. Rhett leaned against his patrol car, running a hand through his hair. Okay, let me think about this logically. We have one physical car here at mile marker 47. But people are seeing what they think is the same car in multiple locations, including driving the wrong way. The most rational explanation is that the fog is causing visual distortions, making people see things that aren't there or misidentifying other vehicles. "And the radio transmissions?" Jonah asked. "The message on the windshield, the figure I saw at the cliff edge? Fog can do weird things to sound. Radio signals bounce off water vapor, create echoes and distortions. As for what you saw..." Rhett trailed off, clearly not wanting to suggest that Jonah had been hallucinating. Jonah wanted to believe that explanation, wanted to accept that everything happening tonight had a rational, scientific basis. But he'd been a highway patrol officer for 6 years, had worked hundreds of shifts in fog just as thick as tonight's, and he'd never experienced anything like this. His radio crackled again, and this time it was a different voice. Male, older, with the calm authority of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. All units, this is Sergeant Malloy. I'm currently at mile marker 55, northbound shoulder. I've located another vehicle matching the description of Mira Holloway's Honda Accord. Engine running, appears abandoned. I'm going to investigate. Jonah grabbed his radio. Sergeant, this is Unit 37. I strongly recommend you do not approach that vehicle alone. We've been experiencing unusual phenomena related to this case. A pause. Then Malloy's voice came back with a note of skepticism. Unit 37, what kind of unusual phenomena? How did you explain it? How did you tell a veteran officer that you'd seen the same car in multiple locations, heard a dead woman's voice on the radio, witnessed a figure floating in midair? Sir, just be careful and keep your radio on. If you experience anything out of the ordinary, call it in immediately. 10-4, Unit 37. I appreciate your concern, but I think I can handle a disabled vehicle investigation. Jonah looked at Rhett. We need to get up there. It's 8 miles away in this fog. It'll take us at least 15 minutes. Then we'd better start now. They left Mira's car where it sat. Neither of them wanted to touch it again, and got into their patrol cars. Jonah led the way north, driving as fast as he dared, while Rhett followed close behind. The fog seemed to be getting worse if that was possible, pressing against his windshield like a living thing. They were at mile marker 52 when Sergeant Malloy's voice came back over the radio, and the change in his tone made Jonah's blood run cold. Dispatch, all units. I need backup at mile marker 55. I've got... Jesus Christ. I don't know what I've got. Sergeant Malloy, this is dispatch. Please clarify. What is your situation? No response. Just the hiss of an open radio connection and the sound of heavy breathing. Sergeant Malloy, respond please. More breathing. Then, the car. It's empty like the others reported. But there's someone in the back seat, a woman. She's just sitting there, staring straight ahead. I can see her through the window, but when I open the door, there's nothing there. And every time I close the door and step back, she's there again. Jonah accelerated, pushing his patrol car faster than was safe in these conditions. Rhett's lights stayed close behind him in the rearview mirror. Sergeant, this is Unit 37. We're en route to your location. Do not engage. Step away from the vehicle and wait for backup. She's looking at me now, Malloy continued, his voice strained. Her eyes, they're not right. They're reflecting the interior light, but they shouldn't be. It's like looking into mirrors, and she's mouthing something, same thing over and over. Sergeant, step away from the vehicle. I can read her lips. She's saying run. She's telling me to run. The radio connection suddenly filled with static so intense that Jonah had to turn down the volume. Through the interference, he could hear Malloy's voice, distant and distorted. It's outside the car now, the thing she was running from. I can see it in the fog. It's not human. It's not... The transmission cut off completely, replaced by dead silence. Sergeant Malloy, Jonah shouted into his radio. Sergeant, respond. Nothing. Dispatch, we have an officer not responding at mile marker 55. We need all available units to that location immediately. 10-4, Unit 37. Be advised, we're having difficulty reaching Sergeant Malloy on any frequency. Jonah saw the flashing lights ahead before he saw the patrol car itself. Malloy's vehicle was pulled over on the shoulder, driver's door standing open, the interior light creating a weak beacon in the fog. And just ahead of it, barely visible, was the Honda Accord. Jonah pulled over and jumped out before his car had fully stopped, his hand on his weapon. Rhett was right behind him, both of them moving toward the Malloy's patrol car in standard formation. Sergeant Malloy, Rhett called out. CHP, identify yourself. The patrol car was empty. Radio still on, engine running, but no sign of Malloy. Jonah swept his flashlight around the immediate area. looking for any sign of where the sergeant might have gone. And then he saw the footprints. They led from Malloy's patrol car toward the cliff edge, visible in the soft dirt at the shoulder's edge. But these weren't normal footprints. They started out clear and defined, showing the tread pattern of standard-issue CHP boots. But as they progressed toward the cliff, they became less distinct, more shallow, until they faded away entirely about 10 feet from the edge. Not like someone had turned around or jumped, like they'd gradually ceased to exist. "Rhett," Jonah said quietly, "look at this." Rhett came over and examined the footprints with his flashlight, his face going pale as he realized what he was seeing. That's not possible. Footprints don't just fade away like that. A lot of things tonight aren't possible. They approached the Honda Accord carefully. Just like all the others, the engine was running, the interior light was on, and the driver's seat was empty. But when Jonah looked through the back window, he saw exactly what Malloy had described. There was a woman sitting in the back seat. She was wearing the same clothes as the figure Jonah had seen at the cliff edge earlier. Dark jeans, a jacket, long hair hanging down to obscure part of her face. She was sitting perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at the back of the driver's seat. Jonah moved to the rear passenger door and looked directly at her through the window. The woman's eyes shifted to meet his, and he felt his breath catch. Malloy had been right. Her eyes were like mirrors, reflecting the interior light back at him with an intensity that was fundamentally wrong. He reached for the door handle, and the woman's lips moved. "Run." Jonah opened the door. The back seat was empty. No woman, no sign that anyone had been sitting there. Just empty leather and that same smell of fog and salt air that permeated everything tonight. He closed the door and stepped back, and when he looked through the window again, she was there, sitting in the exact same position, staring straight ahead with those terrible mirror eyes. "This is impossible," Rhett breathed, standing next to Jonah and staring at the woman who appeared and disappeared depending on whether the door was open or closed. The woman's lips moved again, more urgently this time. "Run, it's here." Jonah felt the temperature drop even further, his breath now coming out in thick clouds despite it being a relatively mild September night. The fog around them began to move in ways that had nothing to do with wind, swirling in patterns that suggested something large moving through it. "We need to get back to our vehicles," Jonah said, his voice low and controlled, despite the fear crawling up his spine. "Now!" They backed away from the Honda Accord, keeping their flashlights sweeping in wide arcs. The fog was definitely moving now, forming shapes that lasted for just a moment before dissolving. And somewhere in that fog, barely visible, was something that didn't belong. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, limbs too long, movement too fluid. And where its eyes should have been were just empty voids that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The thing that Mira Holloway had been running from, the thing that had apparently taken Sergeant Malloy. Jonah's radio crackled to life, and Malloy's voice came through, but it was wrong, distorted and hollow, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Unit 37, don't look at it directly. That's how it sees you. That's how it knows. Sergeant? Where are you? I'm everywhere on this highway now. Just like Mira. It catches you and you become part of it, part of the fog. I can see everything from here, every car, every driver, every person who's ever gone missing on this stretch of road. We're all here, Jonah. All of us." Rhett grabbed Jonah's arm. "We need to leave, right now." Jonah wanted to argue, wanted to search for Malloy, wanted to understand what was happening. But survival instinct overrode professional obligation. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't something they could fight with standard police equipment. They ran for their patrol cars, and behind them the fog entity moved. Jonah could feel it pursuing them, could sense its attention focused on his back like a physical weight. He reached his car and yanked the door open, throwing himself inside and slamming it shut. The fog pressed against his windows, thicker than it should be, almost solid. And in that fog he could see faces, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the people who'd gone missing on Highway 1 over the years, all the unexplained disappearances and assumed accidents. They were all still here, trapped in the fog, part of whatever this entity was. Jonah's radio erupted with voices, all of them talking at once. Mira Holloway, Sergeant Malloy, and others he didn't recognize. Men and women, young and old, all of them trying to speak, to warn, to plead. Don't stop driving. Never get out of your car. It feeds on isolation. The fog is its body. We're all part of it now. Jonah started his engine and put the car in gear, looking for Rhett's patrol car in his rearview mirror. It was there, lights on, and he could see Rhett's pale face through the windshield. They needed to get off this highway, needed to get to somewhere the fog couldn't reach. But when Jonah looked ahead, the road had changed. The center line was gone. The shoulder markers were gone. Even the guardrail had vanished. There was just Highway 1 stretching into the fog, with no beginning and no end, just an infinite stretch of asphalt surrounded by white void. No, Jonah muttered, accelerating anyway. No, this isn't real. The road is still there. The fog is just hiding it. But as he drove, he realized that nothing was changing. No mile markers appeared, no turnoffs, no landmarks. Just the same stretch of highway repeating endlessly, and in his rearview mirror, that dark shape was getting closer. His radio crackled with Mira's voice, clearer now than it had been all night. You're in it now, Officer Kincaid. The fog has you. You can drive forever and never reach anywhere because you're not on the real highway anymore. You're in the space between, where it keeps us. How do I get out? Jonah demanded, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I don't know. I've been trying to find a way out since it caught me. That's why I was calling on the radio. Why I kept appearing at different mile markers. I was hoping someone would understand, would figure out how to break free. But everyone it catches just becomes another voice, another warning that no one heeds. Jonah looked at his speedometer. He was doing 60 miles per hour, faster than was safe in fog this thick, but the scenery, such as it was, never changed. Just endless highway and endless fog. In his rearview mirror, Rhett's patrol car was still following, and beyond that, the dark shape was getting larger, moving faster than their vehicles despite not appearing to run. There has to be a way out, Jonah said, more to himself than to the voices on the radio. Every system has a weakness, every trap has an exit. The fog is thickest on foggy nights, Mira's voice said. But during the day, when the sun burns it off, we become weaker, less substantial. That's when we can almost remember what it was like to be alive, to be free. So, when the sun comes up, the entity retreats. The highway returns to normal. But we don't. We stay trapped, waiting for the next foggy night when it can hunt again. Jonah checked the time on his dashboard. It was just past midnight. Dawn was still hours away, and he didn't think he could outrun this thing for hours, especially not when distance seemed to have no meaning in this fog-wrapped version of Highway 1. He needed a different approach. "Rhett," he called into his radio, hoping his partner could still hear him. "I'm going to try something. Stay close to me no matter what happens." "What are you going to do?" Rhett's voice came back, strained and frightened. Something stupid. Jonah slammed on his brakes, bringing his patrol car to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. In his mirror, Rhett's car slid to a halt behind him, and the dark shape in the fog paused, as if surprised by this change in behavior. "What are you doing?" Mira's voice asked through the radio. urgent and confused. "It will catch you if you stop moving." "Maybe," Jonah said, getting out of his car. "Or maybe that's what it wants us to think. Maybe the running is what feeds it, what gives it power. The fear, the desperation, the endless attempt to escape." He stood in the middle of the highway, facing the approaching shape. Behind him, he heard Rhett's car door open and his partner joining him. "If we're going to die, we might as well do it together," Rhett said quietly. The fog entity emerged from the white void, and up close it was even more terrible than Jonah had imagined. It was composed entirely of fog and shadow, a writhing mass of vaporous tentacles and shifting geometries that hurt to look at directly. And within that mass, he could see the faces of its victims, all of them screaming silently, all of them reaching out for help that would never come. But Jonah stood his ground, fighting every instinct that told him to run. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, though his voice shook with the lie. "You're just fog, just water vapor and cold air. You have no real power except what we give you through our fear." The entity paused, and for a moment, Jonah thought his gamble might work. Thought that maybe confronting it directly, refusing to run, would somehow break its hold. Then it lunged forward, and Jonah felt cold beyond anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical cold, it was the cold of absolute isolation, of being utterly alone in a vast and uncaring universe. It was the cold of every person who'd ever died alone and frightened on this highway, their fear and despair concentrated into a single, terrible moment. Jonah fell to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to think. Next to him, Rhett collapsed as well, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The entity loomed over them, and Jonah could feel it preparing to absorb them, to add them to its collection of victims. He closed his eyes, accepting that this was how it ended. And then, cutting through the cold and the fear and the fog, he heard a different sound. A car horn, long and sustained and completely out of place. Jonah opened his eyes and saw a vehicle approaching through the fog. Not a patrol car or a Honda Accord, but a big rig, an 18-wheeler with its high beams blazing and its horn blaring. The truck was driving straight down the center of the highway, directly toward the fog entity. The entity recoiled from the light and the noise, pulling back from Jonah and Rhett. The truck didn't slow down, didn't swerve. It just kept coming, and as it got closer, Jonah could see the driver. It was an old man, maybe 70, with weathered features and determined eyes. He looked directly at Jonah and jerked his thumb toward the back of the truck, a clear gesture to get moving. Jonah grabbed Rhett and pulled him to his feet, and they ran for their patrol cars as the truck roared past them. The entity tried to surround the vehicle, tried to engulf it the way it had tried to engulf Jonah and Rhett, but the truck's momentum carried it through. And where the truck passed, the fog thinned. Not disappeared entirely, but weakened enough that Jonah could see the real Highway 1 beneath it. Mile markers, guardrails, the actual road surface instead of the endless nothing he'd been driving through. "Follow that truck," Jonah shouted to Rhett as he jumped into his patrol car. They accelerated after the big rig, staying close to its tailgate. The fog entity tried to pursue them, but it seemed unable or unwilling to get too close to the truck's bright lights and loud engine. Behind them, the impossible highway was collapsing, the fog-wrapped nightmare giving way to the real world. Jonah watched his odometer tick over, watched real mile markers flash by in his headlights. 55, 56, 57. They were back on the actual highway, escaping the trap that had caught Mira and Malloy and countless others. The truck led them north for another 10 miles before pulling into a rest area. Jonah and Rhett followed, parking their patrol cars next to the big rig. The old man climbed down from the cab, moving with the stiff care of someone who'd spent decades sitting in a driver's seat. "You boys okay?" he asked, his voice rough from years of road dust and diesel fumes. "How did you know?" Jonah asked. "How did you know we were in trouble?" The old man pulled out a CB radio handset from his pocket. "Been monitoring the emergency frequencies. Heard all those strange transmissions, figured something wasn't right. I've been driving this coast for 40 years, son. I know when the fog isn't acting natural. What was that thing? Damned if I know. But I've seen it before, or felt its presence anyway. Nights when the fog gets thick and strange things start happening on the highway. People disappear. Cars are found empty. Voices on the radio that shouldn't be there." He shook his head. "Most folks chalk it up to accidents or people wandering off confused. But I know better. There's something in that fog that hunts." "How did you fight it off?" Rhett asked. "I didn't fight it. I just didn't give it what it wanted. That thing feeds on fear and isolation. It wants you alone and scared. But a big rig with its lights on and horn blaring, that's not isolated. That's not quiet. It's too much noise, too much presence for it to handle." Jonah thought about that. The entity had been able to trap him and Rhett when they were alone in their cars, cut off from the real world. But the truck had broken through that isolation, had forced the fog to retreat. "There are people trapped in there," Jonah said. "I saw them, heard their voices. Mira Holloway, Sergeant Malloy, others. Can they be saved?" The old man's expression grew sad. "I don't know, son. I've never known anyone to come back once that fog takes them. Best we can do is warn others, help people avoid the same fate." Jonah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that there had to be a way to rescue the victims. But he'd seen the faces in the fog, had heard the hopelessness in their voices. They weren't just trapped. They'd become part of the entity itself. His radio crackled weakly, and Mira's voice came through one last time, faint and distant. "Thank you for trying, Officer Kincaid. Not everyone does. Most people just run and forget, but you tried to help. That matters. I'll find a way to get you out," Jonah promised. "Somehow. Don't make promises you can't keep. Just warn people. Tell them not to drive alone on foggy nights. Tell them that if they see a car on the shoulder with its hazards on, don't stop. Just keep driving and don't look back." The transmission faded away, leaving only static. The old trucker put a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "You did what you could. That's all any of us can do. Now come on, let's get you boys some coffee and figure out how to explain this to your superiors." As they walked toward the rest area's small cafe, Jonah looked back toward the south, where the fog still hung thick over Highway 1. Somewhere in that fog, Mira Holloway and Sergeant Malloy and all the others were still trapped, still calling out warnings that most people would never hear. But Jonah had heard them, and he wouldn't forget. The cafe at the rest area was one of those places that existed solely for travelers who had nowhere else to go at 2 in the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow that felt almost aggressive after the soft darkness of the fog. Jonah sat across from Rhett and the old trucker, whose name he'd learned was Dale Pritchard, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since the previous shift. "So, what do we tell the department?" Rhett asked quietly, staring into his own untouched coffee. "We just lost a sergeant. We need to report it, but how do we explain what happened?" Jonah had been wrestling with the same question. The truth, that Sergeant Malloy had been absorbed by some kind of entity living in the fog, would get them both sent for psychiatric evaluation. But lying didn't feel right either, not when a fellow officer was gone. Dale lit a cigarette despite the no smoking sign on the wall, and the waitress behind the counter didn't say anything. "You boys are going to have to decide how much you value your careers versus the truth." "Me? I've tried telling people about the fog before. Coast Guard, local police, even tried contacting some university researchers. Nobody wants to hear it. They'd rather believe in coincidence and bad luck than accept there's something out there that doesn't fit in their understanding of the world. But people are dying, Jonah said. Mira Holloway, Sergeant Malloy, and who knows how many others over the years. We can't just pretend it's not happening. You can't stop it either, son. I've been watching this thing for 40 years. It comes and goes with the fog, takes who it wants, and there's nothing anyone can do about it except avoid driving alone on nights like this. Dale tapped ash into his coffee cup. Your sergeant knew the risks. Every cop who works this highway knows, even if they don't admit it. They know there are nights when people disappear without explanation. Jonah thought about the missing person reports he'd filed over the years. Cars found empty on the shoulder. Drivers never located. He'd always assumed they'd wandered off confused or jumped from the cliffs or been picked up by someone passing by. But now he wondered how many of them had been taken by the fog. His radio, sitting on the table next to his coffee, crackled with soft static. Through the interference, he could hear voices. Not clear enough to make out words, but he recognized the cadences. Mira, Malloy, others he didn't know. All of them still out there, still trapped. I need to go back, Jonah said suddenly. Rhett looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Go back where? Into the fog? That thing almost killed us, Jonah. If Dale hadn't shown up when he did, I know. But we left people behind. We left Sergeant Malloy behind. Malloy is gone, Rhett said firmly. You saw what happened to him. We can't save him. Maybe not, but we can at least document what's happening. Build a case file, collect evidence. Someone needs to start taking this seriously. Dale stubbed out his cigarette and leaned back in his chair. I've got dashcam footage from tonight. Recorded the whole thing. You boys trapped on that endless highway, the fog entity, all of it. But I'm warning you, even with video evidence, people will find ways to explain it away. Trick of the light, camera malfunction, mass hallucination, they'll come up with anything except the truth. I still have to try, Jonah insisted. Rhett was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but we do this smart. We document everything, build an airtight case before we take it to anyone. And we don't go back into that fog alone. Agreed. They spent the next hour going over everything that had happened, writing down times, locations, details. Dale shared his dashcam footage, which showed exactly what Jonah remembered. The impossible highway stretching into infinity, the fog entity pursuing them, the moment when the truck broke through and reality reasserted itself. As dawn began to break outside the cafe windows, the fog started to lift. Jonah watched it dissipate in the growing light, the white blanket thinning and fragmenting until patches of actual highway became visible. It's weakening, he observed. Always does when the sun comes up, Dale confirmed. That thing lives in darkness and isolation. Daylight doesn't kill it, but it makes it retreat, makes it harder for it to maintain its hold. What about the people it's taken? Mira said they're still there, waiting for the next foggy night. That's the cruel part. During the day, they're conscious but powerless. They can see the highway, see the regular traffic passing by, but they can't interact with it. They're like ghosts, I suppose. Aware, but unable to affect the physical world. Then when the fog rolls in again, that thing wakes up and they become part of its hunting. Jonah's radio crackled again, and this time Mira's voice came through clearly. She sounded exhausted, defeated. I can feel the sun. It's burning the fog away, and I can almost remember what it felt like to be warm. But I know it won't last. Tonight the fog will return, and I'll be hunting again whether I want to or not. Mira, this is Officer Kincaid. Can you tell me anything about the entity? Anything that might help us stop it? A long pause, filled with the sound of distant waves. It's old, so old that the highway is new compared to it. This coastline has always had fog, and it's always had this thing living in it. The Native Americans who lived here before any roads were built, they had stories about it. Called it different names in different languages, but the meaning was always the same. The thing that takes the lonely, the thing that feeds on isolation. How do we fight something like that? You don't. You survive it, or you don't. That's all there is. Her voice grew fainter. The sun's getting stronger. I have to go. But Officer Kincaid, thank you for not forgetting about us. Most people do. The transmission ended, and as the last of the fog burned away in the morning sunlight, Jonah felt something shift in his chest. A determination that went beyond professional obligation. He would find a way to help them. Somehow. Over the next 2 weeks, Jonah threw himself into research. He filed his official report on Sergeant Malloy's disappearance, carefully wording it to describe equipment malfunction and disorientation in heavy fog without mentioning the supernatural elements. The department ruled it a tragic accident, another victim of the treacherous coastal conditions. But privately, Jonah was building a different kind of file. He compiled missing person reports going back decades, all of them involving Highway 1 on foggy nights. He interviewed Dale Pritchard extensively, getting details about all the strange occurrences he'd witnessed over 40 years of driving that route. He even tracked down a few Native American historians who shared stories about the fog spirit, the entity that had haunted the coast long before Europeans arrived. The pattern was clear and undeniable once you knew to look for it. People disappeared from Highway 1 during heavy fog at a rate far higher than could be explained by accidents or voluntary disappearances. And the reports shared common elements. Vehicles found running with personal effects inside, no signs of struggle, no bodies ever recovered. Rhett helped when he could, though he was clearly uncomfortable with the whole investigation. Even if we prove something is happening, he said one evening as they reviewed footage, what then? We can't exactly arrest a fog monster. No, but we can warn people. Issue advisories on foggy nights, recommend that people avoid the coastal route or at least don't travel alone. The department will never authorize that. It would hurt tourism, make people afraid to drive Highway 1. Do you know how much money flows through this region because of coastal traffic? Jonah knew Rhett was right, but he couldn't let it go. Not when he knew that every foggy night brought the entity back, brought Mira and Malloy and all the others back to hunt, whether they wanted to or not. 3 weeks after the incident, Jonah was assigned to night patrol again. The weather report called for clear skies, but as he started his shift, he could see fog building offshore. By the time he reached Highway 1, it was rolling in thick and fast, swallowing the coastal road in familiar white embrace. His radio crackled to life before he even called in his position. "Officer Kincaid, it's me. Mira." "I'm here," he said quietly. "There's another one." A driver stopped on the shoulder at mile marker 43. Young man, early 20s, car broke down. He called for a tow truck, but it won't arrive for another hour. He's alone, and the fog is getting thicker. Jonah checked his position. He was at mile marker 38, only a few minutes away. "I'm en route. Hurry, I can feel it waking up. It knows he's there and it's starting to hunt." Jonah accelerated through the fog, his lights and siren on. The highway felt normal tonight. No sense of that impossible, endless stretch he'd experienced before. Maybe the entity was weaker now, or maybe it was focusing its attention on easier prey. He found the stranded vehicle exactly where Mira said it would be. A young man in a college sweatshirt was sitting in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, looking nervous but not yet panicked. Jonah pulled over and approached the vehicle, tapping on the window. The young man looked relieved to see a police officer and rolled down his window. "Oh man, am I glad to see you. My car just died and I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. This fog is really creeping me out." "I understand, sir. I'm going to need you to come with me. We'll wait for the tow truck in my patrol car." "Is that necessary? I mean, I'm okay waiting here. Sir, I need to insist. There have been some safety concerns on this stretch of highway during heavy fog. Please come with me." Something in Jonah's tone must have conveyed the urgency, because the young man didn't argue further. He grabbed his backpack and got out of his car, following Jonah back to the patrol vehicle. As soon as they were both inside with the doors locked, Jonah felt the temperature drop. The fog pressed against his windows, thicker and more aggressive than normal fog should be. And in his rearview mirror, he saw it. The entity, moving through the fog toward the abandoned car. It circled the vehicle once, twice, searching for the prey it had expected to find. Then it seemed to sense where the young man had gone and turned its attention toward Jonah's patrol car. "What is that?" the young man breathed, staring at the dark shape moving in the fog. "What the hell is that?" "Something that lives in the fog," Jonah said, starting his engine. "Something that hunts people who travel alone." He drove away from the shoulder, keeping his speed steady and his lights on. The entity tried to follow, but just like Dale had demonstrated, the noise and light of the moving vehicle seemed to repel it. After a few hundred yards, it gave up the pursuit and faded back into the fog. "That's not possible," the young man said, his voice shaking. "Things like that don't exist." "I know, but you saw it anyway." Jonah drove the young man to the next rest area and waited with him until the tow truck arrived. Before they parted ways, Jonah handed him a business card with his personal cell number written on the back. "If you ever need to drive Highway 1 on a foggy night, call me first. I'll make sure you're not alone." The young man took the card with trembling hands, nodded, and left without another word. Jonah knew he'd never call, knew he'd probably convince himself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. That was fine. At least he was alive. His radio crackled. "Thank you." Mira's voice soft and grateful. "You saved him. How many more are out there tonight? How many people alone on this highway?" "Too many, but you can't save them all, Officer Kincaid. All you can do is try." Over the following months, Jonah developed a routine. On nights when fog rolled in, he'd patrol Highway 1 more actively than usual. He'd listen to his radio for Mira's warnings, respond to stranded vehicles more quickly, and make sure no one was left alone on the shoulder for long. He couldn't save everyone. There were too many miles of highway and not enough patrol cars. But he saved some. He also started connecting with other officers who'd experienced strange things on foggy nights. Quietly, carefully, he built a network of people who knew the truth even if they couldn't say it publicly. They shared information, coordinated patrols, developed informal protocols for keeping people safe. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. One night, 6 months after his first encounter with the fog entity, Jonah was patrolling during a particularly thick fog when his radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. "Officer Kincaid, this is Sergeant Malloy." Jonah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Sergeant? I know I'm gone. I know what I've become. But I wanted to tell you something. The entity, it's not invulnerable. It's strong during fog, weak during daylight. But there's another weakness: connection, community. It feeds on isolation, which means it's weakened by the opposite." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that every person you keep from being alone on foggy nights, every driver you help, every stranded traveler you stay with, it weakens the entity a little bit. Not enough to kill it, Maybe never enough for that, but enough to save lives, enough to matter. Can you be freed? You and Mira and the others? A long pause. I don't know. I've been trying to find a way, but it's hard to think clearly when you're part of it. Sometimes I can't remember who I was before. Sometimes I can't remember anything except the hunt. His voice grew fainter. But knowing you're out here, helping people, fighting it even in this small way, that helps me remember, helps all of us remember that we were human once. I won't stop, Jonah promised. I'll keep fighting it. I know you will. That's why we help you when we can. Why we warn you about stranded drivers and dangerous situations. We're trapped, but we're not completely lost. Not yet. The transmission faded, and Jonah drove on through the fog, his headlights cutting through the white void. Somewhere out there, the entity was hunting. Somewhere out there, Mira and Malloy and countless others were trapped in an existence they never chose. But Jonah was hunting too, and he wasn't alone. He thought about Dale Pritchard, still driving his big rig up and down the coast, his presence a bright noisy deterrent to the fog. He thought about the network of officers he'd built, all of them watching for signs of the entity's activity. He thought about every person he'd kept safe, every stranded driver he'd stayed with until help arrived. It wasn't victory. The entity still existed, still claimed victims when it could. But it was resistance. It was refusal to accept that some things couldn't be fought. As dawn approached and the fog began to thin, Jonah's radio crackled one last time. "We're fading again," Mira's voice whispered. "But we'll be back tonight if the fog returns. And the night after that, and the night after that. Forever, probably." "I'll be here too," Jonah said. "I promise. I know. That's what keeps us human, knowing someone cares enough to try." The sun rose over the Pacific, burning away the fog and bringing Highway 1 back to its normal self. Morning traffic began to flow. Commuters, tourists, truckers making their deliveries. All of them oblivious to what had been hunting in the fog just hours before. Jonah finished his shift and drove home as the highway filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. He would sleep through the day, and when night fell, he'd be back on patrol, waiting for the next fog, waiting for Mira's next warning. Some battles couldn't be won. Some enemies couldn't be defeated, but they could be fought. Day after day, night after night, fog after fog. And that, Jonah had learned, was enough.